The lights snap on. White. Blinding. Arthur Fleck flinches like a man dragged back from the grave. Metal chair. Cold cuffs. A room that smells like bleach and old despair. He's not on a stage anymore. No applause. No laughter. Just the hum of Arkham State Hospital breathing around him like a living thing. And across the glass, someone is watching. Smiling. He doesn't know her name yet, but she already knows his. Gotham has moved on, or at least it pretends to. The riots faded into headlines, then into late-night jokes, then into silence. But inside these gray walls, the legend of the Joker lingers like cigarette smoke that won't clear. Arthur sits alone most days, replaying Murray's final gasp in his mind, over and over, like a punchline that never quite lands. He tells himself it was destiny, that the city needed a symbol. But at night, when the corridors go quiet and the guards stop talking, doubt creeps in. Was he a revolutionary, or just a man who finally broke? That's when she appears again. Lee Quinzel, doctor, observer, devotee. The first time she speaks, her voice is soft, almost musical. She doesn't ask about the murders. She asks about the jokes, about how it feels to make a whole city laugh with a single bullet. Arthur studies her through the glass. Most people look at him with fear or disgust. She looks at him like he's a masterpiece hanging in a museum no one else understands. And that look, it does something to him. Warms a place that's been frozen for years. Their sessions begin as interviews. Clinical. Controlled. A tape recorder clicks on between them. But slowly, the rules bend. She leans closer than necessary. He answers questions he swore he never would. He tells her about his mother, the lies, the adoption papers. The moment he realized his entire life had been written by someone else. His laugh tries to break through, sharp and involuntary, but she doesn't recoil. She laughs with him, not at him. With him. And for Arthur, that difference feels like oxygen after drowning. But here's the thing about Arkham. It feeds on fantasy. The more Arthur talks, the more vivid his world becomes. Music swells where there is none. The sterile room transforms into a grand stage in his mind. He imagines Harley stepping into the spotlight beside him, her white coat replaced by sequins and red silk. They dance across a Gotham that cheers their madness. Two souls, finally understood. The guards don't see the choreography. They see a patient staring too long at a doctor. They see a doctor staying past her shift. They whisper. One afternoon, Harley does something she's not supposed to do. She turns off the recorder before the session ends. Silence fills the room, thick and electric. "They don't get you," she murmurs, almost to herself. Arthur tilts his head, his eyes narrow. "This is new. This is dangerous." She slides a folder across the table. Newspaper clippings, protesters wearing clown masks, murals painted overnight on brick walls. The Joker didn't die in that studio. He multiplied. Arthur's pulse quickens. His fingers tremble against the cuffs. "They're still out there," she says, waiting. Waiting for what? For him? The idea blooms inside his chest, fragile and intoxicating. He thought he'd been discarded, locked away, reduced to a case study. But if Gotham still chants his name in alleyways, if the masks still appear in crowds, then maybe this isn't the end of the joke. Maybe it's intermission. Days blur. Harlene's questions grow less professional, more personal. She confesses her frustrations with the system, the hypocrisy, the way Arkham claims to heal but only cages. Arthur listens, really listens, and something shifts between them. It's no longer doctor and patient. It's co-conspirators sharing secrets in the dark. When he laughs now, it's softer, controlled, chosen. He can feel himself becoming someone new, less fractured, more focused. Not a random spark of chaos, a movement. But movements need leaders, and leaders need freedom. One night, a riot erupts in the lower ward. Inmates screaming, glass shattering, fire alarms howling like wounded animals. Arthur sits on his bunk, perfectly still. He didn't plan this, or did he? The guards rush past his cell, distracted, panicked. And then he hears footsteps approaching. Slow, deliberate. A key slides into the lock. The door creaks open. Harley stands there, hair loose, eyes shining with something that isn't sanity. Smoke curls down the corridor behind her. She reaches for his hand, uncuffing him with trembling fingers. "Let's give them the show they deserve," she whispers. Arthur rises. And for the first time since the gunshot echoed through that television studio, he feels the audience leaning forward, waiting for the next punchline. Smoke swallows the corridor. Red lights strobe. For a second, Arthur thinks this is another fantasy music about to swell, applause ready to crash in. But the heat on his face is real, the alarms are real, and Harlene's hand in his, that's real too. It's trembling, not with fear, with anticipation. They move through Arkham like ghosts slipping between heartbeats. Orderlies sprint past without looking twice. Inmates pound on cell doors, chanting his name. Joker, Joker, Joker. The sound crawls under his skin, electric and intoxicating. Arthur straightens his shoulders. He doesn't shuffle anymore. He glides. Every flicker of emergency light feels like a spotlight finding him again. Harlene leads him down a restricted stairwell she shouldn't even know about. The city's ready, she breathes, almost laughing. They just need a spark. Her white coat is gone now, replaced by something brighter, reckless, red stitched into black like a warning no one heeded. Arthur studies her profile as they descend. She's changed. Or maybe this is who she always was, waiting for permission to exist. Outside, Gotham burns in pockets. News vans swarm the asylum gates. Protesters in clown masks clash with police under the cold wash of street lamps. The riot inside Arkham spills outward like infection. Arthur pauses at the threshold, breathing in the night air thick with gasoline and rain. Freedom tastes metallic, sharp, alive. Harlene squeezes his hand. They did this for you. But here's the twist. Arthur didn't ask for this. He steps into the chaos anyway. Flashlights catch his face. Gasps ripple through the crowd. Someone drops to their knees, laughing hysterically. Someone else throws a brick through a squad car window. The city fractures in real time. Arthur feels the old laugh clawing up his throat, but he swallows it. Not yet. Timing is everything. A gunshot cracks. Too close. Police surge forward. Batons raised. Tear gas blooms like poisonous flowers. Harlene pulls him into an alley, both of them coughing as smoke floods their lungs. She's smiling through it. Smiling. This is what they deserve, she says, voice hoarse. A mirror. Arthur studies her in the flickering light of a dumpster fire. There's devotion in her eyes. Worship. It should thrill him. It does. But beneath it, something else pulses. Expectation. She doesn't just want to stand beside him, she wants to become him. Sirens multiply. The alley trembles with approaching boots. Arthur glances upward at a fire escape rattling in the wind. Without a word, he starts climbing. Harlene follows, boots slipping on wet metal. Below, officers flood the street, scanning rooftops. The city feels smaller from up here, fragile, like a toy set waiting to be kicked over. They reach the top. Wind tears at their clothes. Gotham stretches in every direction, angry, confused, alive. Helicopters circle like vultures. Arthur steps to the edge, looking down at the swarm of flashing lights. He raises his arms slowly. Silence hits him. Not outside. Inside. For a heartbeat, there's no music, no imagined audience, just him. A man on a rooftop who pulled a trigger and started something he can't control. I didn't plan this, he thinks. Did I? Harley moves beside him, breathless. Say something, she urges. They're watching. He looks at her. And suddenly he understands. This isn't just about chaos anymore. It's about legacy. About writing a story so loud the city can never forget the sound of it. The masks in the streets aren't followers. They're proof. Proof that pain can spread faster than hope. Arthur tilts his head back and finally lets the laugh explode out of him. It echoes off brick and glass, wild and unstoppable. Down below, the crowd erupts in response. Some cheer, some scream, some run. Harlene laughs too, her voice braiding with his until it's impossible to tell where one ends and the other begins. Sirens close in. Spotlights lock onto them. And as officers begin climbing the building from both sides, Arthur turns to Harlene with a grin that's no longer uncertain. Ready for Act 2? He asks. Because this time, he's not running alone. They don't jump. They descend. Sirens choke the streets below, but Arthur doesn't panic. He studies the climbing officers with calm amusement, then glances at Harlene. She's vibrating with adrenaline, eyes wide, chest rising fast. This is the part she loves, the edge. The almost. He grabs her wrist and pulls her toward the opposite side of the rooftop where a rusted maintenance ladder drops into darkness. They climb down into an abandoned theater. Dust swirls in the beam of Arthur's stolen flashlight. Torn velvet seats. A stage cracked down the center. The place smells like mildew and forgotten dreams. And for a flicker of a second, Arthur is back in that comedy club years ago, waiting for laughter that never came. His throat tightens. Harlene doesn't see it. She's spinning slowly, arms out, imagining a full house. Can you hear them? She whispers. He can. Not real applause, memory, echo, the kind that lives behind the eyes. Outside, the riot spreads block by block. Clown masks multiply on every news channel. Analysts argue. Politicians condemn. Protesters chant. The Joker isn't just a man anymore, he's a symbol stitched into the city's skin. And symbols are harder to cage. Harleen climbs onto the stage and curtsies to invisible fans. "We could make this our headquarters," she says, breathless. "Broadcast from here. Turn the city into our choir." Arthur watches her carefully now. There's devotion in her movements, yes, but there's also hunger. She doesn't just want to follow the chaos, she wants to conduct it. A police loudspeaker crackles outside the theater. They've tracked them. Already, helicopter blades thud overhead like a racing heartbeat. Arthur steps onto the stage beside her, the wood creaking under his weight. He leans close enough to smell her perfume. Sweet, sharp, almost medicinal. "Why?" he asks quietly. She blinks. "Why what? Why me?" The question hangs between them heavier than the sirens. Harleen's smile falters for the first time. "Just a crack. Because you showed them the truth, that the system's a joke, that their rules don't matter." Her voice grows stronger as she speaks, convincing herself. "You're not broken, Arthur. You're awake." Awake. He remembers his mother's voice calling him happy, remembers the adoption papers, the lies, the way every truth he uncovered only hollowed him out more. Awake felt a lot like alone. Glass shatters in the lobby. Flashlights sweep through dust. Officers are inside. Harleen grabs his face suddenly, fiercely. "We don't stop now," she says. "We push harder. We make them afraid." But Arthur isn't looking at the doors. He's looking at her, at the fire behind her eyes, at the way she trembles, not from fear, but exhilaration. And something clicks into place. She didn't fall for him because he was misunderstood. She fell for the chaos. Boots pound closer. "Police! Hands up!" Arthur steps back from Harleen slowly, raises his arms. She stares at him, confused. "What are you doing?" His laugh slips out, soft, controlled, almost tender. Changing the script. Officers flood the theater, guns drawn, red dots dance across their chests. Harleen's breathing turns ragged. This wasn't the plan. She looks to him for guidance. She looks to him for guidance. Arthur lowers himself to his knees. The room stills. For a split second, even the police hesitate. The great Joker surrendering without a fight. No grand finale. No blood-soaked encore. Harleen's voice breaks. "Arthur?" He turns his head just enough to see her from the corner of his eye. And there it is, that flicker of betrayal, of disbelief. She thought they were writing a love story in flames. But Arthur understands something she doesn't. Symbols grow stronger in cages. As officers tackle him to the floor, as cuffs snap around his wrists again, he doesn't resist. He smiles. Because now the city will watch the trial, the interviews, the spectacle. They'll argue about his sanity, his influence, his legend. And Harleen? She's left standing alone on the stage as they drag him away. Spotlight gone. Applause fading. And for the first time, she looks afraid. The courtroom smells like sweat and old wood. Cameras crowd every aisle. Gotham doesn't blink anymore. It broadcasts. Arthur sits shackled at the defense table, pale under fluorescent lights, his hair trimmed, his face scrubbed clean of paint. No grin, no performance. Just a man in a wrinkled suit watching the circus build around him. Across the room, Harleen sits behind the prosecution's bench. Not as a doctor, as a witness. The shift hits like a blade sliding between ribs. She won't look at him. Her hair is tied back, expression composed, but her fingers twitch against the folder in her lap. The state calls her their star testimony, the psychiatrist who fell under his spell and lived to tell the truth. Gotham leans forward. Betrayal tastes better than justice. Arthur tilts his head, studying her profile. This is new. This is dangerous. The prosecutor paints him as contagion, a virus in grease paint, a manipulator who exploited a vulnerable doctor to ignite chaos, riots, injuries, death. Every word lands heavy, deliberate. The screens outside the courthouse replay footage of masked protesters clashing with police. His laugh echoes through news segments like a ghost that refuses to die. Then Harleen takes the stand. Silence folds over the room. She swears to tell the truth. Her voice is steady at first. Clinical. She describes his delusions, his fantasies of grandeur, the imagined music. The way he blurred reality with spectacle. Each sentence cuts a thread between them. She tells the jury he is unstable, dangerous, a narcissist who feeds on attention. Arthur listens without blinking, but then something fractures. The prosecutor asks when she realized he was manipulating her. A simple question. Clean. Expected. Harleen hesitates. A flicker. A breath too long. I believed I was helping him, she says carefully. But he amplified my doubts, turned my frustrations into something theatrical. The word hangs there. Theatrical. Arthur smiles faintly. Because that isn't what happened. Memory shifts inside his mind like stage lights changing color. He remembers the recorder clicking off. The folder of newspaper clippings. Her eyes shining before he ever touched her hand. She didn't fall because he pushed. She jumped. The defense attorney rises slowly. Dr. Quinzel, he says, voice smooth. Isn't it true you violated hospital protocol before Mr. Fleck ever requested it? That you stayed after hours? That you initiated physical contact? Murmurs ripple. Harleen's jaw tightens. I was conducting observational therapy. Without supervision? A beat. Her composure cracks, just slightly. Arthur leans back in his chair, chains clinking softly. The music swells in his head again, but this time, it's different. Not fantasy, not delusion. Strategy. Because the more they paint him as mastermind, the more the city mythologizes him. And if Harleen is the tragic victim, then he becomes something larger than flesh. But what if she isn't the victim? The defense produces security footage. Grainy, black and white. Harleen unlocking his cell during the riot, her hand reaching for his first. Gasps slice the air. Harleen's breathing grows shallow. The prosecutor objects. Overruled. Arthur watches her carefully now, searching her face for the fire that once burned there. It's still there. Buried under shame and fear, but alive. She isn't afraid of him. She's afraid of losing the story they were building. The judge calls for order as the courtroom erupts in whispers. Outside, protesters gather again, split down the middle. Some chant for justice. Others chant his name. Arthur stands suddenly. Chains rattle. The judge slams his gavel. Sit down, Mr. Fleck. But Arthur doesn't sit. He looks directly at Harleen. And for a moment, the noise fades. The cameras disappear. It's just them on that cracked theater stage again. You wanted a show, he says softly, voice carrying farther than it should. So why pretend you weren't dancing? The courtroom explodes. Harleen's mask shatters. Rage floods her expression, hot and undeniable. You ruined everything, she shouts before she can stop herself. Everything. Not my career, not my life. Everything. Arthur's laugh slips out, low and satisfied. Because now, the jury sees it. The city sees it. This wasn't a monster preying on innocence. This was a duet. Guards force him back into his seat as chaos consumes the room. The judge threatens contempt. Reporters scramble. Outside, the chants grow louder. And in the middle of it all, Arthur understands the truth neither side can control. If he goes down, she goes down with him. The question isn't whether Gotham will condemn them, it's whether it's ready to watch them burn together. The verdict doesn't come fast. It drips. Day after day, Gotham devours every second of the trial. Panel shows dissect her testimony. Psychiatrists debate his diagnosis. Protesters split into factions. Free the Joker. Lock them both away. Murals appear overnight, two faces pressed together, smeared in red and blue. A new name starts trending across the city like a dare. Folie Deux. Madness shared. Inside his holding cell beneath the courthouse, Arthur sits cross-legged on the concrete, listening to the muffled roar above him. He can feel it shifting. The narrative, the weight of it. This isn't about guilt anymore. It's about spectacle. And spectacle has momentum. Harleen visits him once before, closing arguments. No glass between them this time. Just a steel table bolted to the floor and two guards pretending not to listen. She looks thinner, eyes rimmed red. The fire hasn't died. It's condensed. You could have let me walk away, she says quietly. Arthur studies the faint tremor in her hands. You didn't want to walk away? A beat. Her jaw tightens. They're going to bury you. He smiles faintly. They already tried that. Above them, the courtroom erupts again. Someone shouting, a gavel slamming. Time is running out. The prosecution is pushing for maximum security confinement. Permanent isolation. No interviews. No cameras. Erasure. That's what truly frightens him. Not prison. Silence. Harleen leans closer across the table. Her voice drops to a whisper. It doesn't have to end in a cage. Something shifts in the air. He tilts his head. What are you offering, doctor? She slides a folded clipping across the metal surface. Not a newspaper. A blueprint. Underground transit lines beneath Gotham old maintenance tunnels long abandoned. One runs directly beneath the courthouse. Arthur's pulse slows instead of racing. Calm. Focused. "You testified against me," he says softly. Her eyes shine now, not with shame, but conviction. "I testified for us." The realization hits like cold water. Her breakdown on the stand. The fury. The exposed devotion. It wasn't loss of control. It was ignition. Closing arguments begin above them. The prosecutor paints a future where Arthur disappears into a padded cell forever. The defense counters with shared culpability, systemic failure, the city's rot. Jurors avoid eye contact. The decision feels inevitable. But inevitability is just another script. Night falls before the jury returns. Guilty. The word slams into the room like a dropped blade. Gasps. Cheers. Outside, riots spark instantly, as if the city had been waiting for permission. Arthur doesn't flinch. He stands as the judge sentences him to permanent confinement in Arkham's most secure wing. No parole, no press, no visitors without approval. Isolation. As guards move to escort him below, the courthouse trembles. At first, it sounds like thunder. Then the floor cracks. Screams rip through the chamber as dust erupts from beneath the benches. A deafening explosion tears through the lower-level controlled, precise. The lights die. Darkness swallows everything. Panic detonates. Arthur feels hands shove him forward, but not roughly. Directed. The guard at his elbow stumbles too easily. Another drops keys at his feet. This is choreography. Smoke floods the hallway as masked figures pour through a shattered wall leading to the old transit line. Red and blue paint streak their faces. They don't shout his name, they chant hers. "Harley, Harley, Harley." Arthur turns. Through the haze, she steps forward, not in a suit, not in a lab coat. In crimson and black, hair loose, eyes blazing with something unstoppable. She's not trembling now. She's commanding. "You said they needed a show," she calls over the chaos. "So let's give them an encore." For a split second, he just watches her. This wasn't about saving him. This was about ascending. She offers him her hand, not as a devotee, but as an equal. Sirens wail outside. Gunfire cracks somewhere in the dark. The tunnel yawns open behind her like a throat ready to swallow them whole. Arthur laughs. Not wild, not broken. Proud. And as he takes her hand and steps into the collapsing underworld beneath Gotham, he realizes something thrilling and terrifying at once. He didn't create the movement. He inspired something that no longer needs him to lead. The tunnel breathes damp and cold, swallowing the chaos above. Dust rains from the cracked ceiling as Arthur and Harley run, boots splashing through shallow water that smells of rust and rot. Behind them, masked followers seal the entrance with smoke and debris. Gunfire fades. Sirens distort into distant wails. Underground, Gotham sounds different, muffled, vulnerable. Harley leads now. She moves with certainty through the abandoned transit veins, barking orders to the others. Charges set, routes split, safe houses activated. This wasn't impulse, it was architecture. Arthur watches her from a step behind, something unfamiliar tightening in his chest. Pride. And something sharper. She planned this without him. They reach an old subway platform lit by flickering emergency lamps. Graffiti coats the walls. Two faces intertwined in red and black. Their faces. A crowd waits there, maybe 50 strong, eyes shining in the half-light. When Harley steps forward, they erupt. Harley, Harley, not Joker. Arthur feels it like a shift in gravity. Harley raises her hands and the noise dies instantly. Authority settles on her shoulders like it belongs there. "Tonight," she calls out, voice echoing off tile and steel. "They tried to bury us. They tried to erase the truth. But the truth doesn't live in courtrooms, it lives in us." Cheers explode. Arthur studies the crowd. These aren't rioters chasing adrenaline. They're organized, coordinated, devoted. And at the center of it stands the woman who once sat across from him with a tape recorder and a soft smile. She turns to him, eyes blazing. "Say something." The room waits. Arthur steps forward slowly. Water drips somewhere in the dark. His reflection trembles in a puddle at his feet, two colors blending together. For a second, the old music rises in his head, swelling toward some grand speech. But it falters, because this isn't his stage anymore. He looks at the faces before him, hopeful, furious, desperate. He remembers being alone in his apartment, talking to a television that never answered back. He remembers pulling that trigger just to feel seen. "I never wanted to lead you," he says quietly. Confusion ripples. "I wanted the world to admit it was broken." Silence. Harley watches him carefully now. "And you did," she says, stepping beside him. "You cracked it open. Her hand slides into his, squeezing hard enough to hurt. A reminder. A warning. Suddenly, explosions rumble in the distance, closer than before. The city has followed them underground. Tactical units sweep the tunnels. Floodlights flare at the far end of the platform. Time compresses. Harley signals her followers to scatter into side corridors. Chaos fractures the space. Arthur grabs her arm. "This keeps escalating," he says low. "More bodies, more fire. That's the point," she snaps. "Revolution isn't gentle." Footsteps thunder toward them. Arthur sees it clearly now. The path ahead. Endless confrontation. Endless spectacle. And eventually, endless blood. The movement no longer needs a symbol. It needs a martyr. He stops running. Harley doesn't. She turns back, furious. "What are you doing?" Floodlights blind him. Officers pour into the platform, weapons raised, shouts echo off tile. Arthur steps forward alone, hands lifting slowly. Again. Harley's face fractures. Not betrayal this time. Terror. "Don't," she whispers. He smiles at her, softer than she's ever seen. "They can't kill an idea," he says. A single shot rings out. Warning, not impact. Officers tackle him hard against the concrete. Pain bursts through his ribs. He doesn't resist. Through the chaos, he locks eyes with Harley one last time as smoke swallows her escape route. She stands frozen between fight and flight. "Run!" he mouths. And this time, she does. As they drag him back toward the light, battered but laughing, Arthur understands the final twist of the joke. Legends survive cages. But martyrs? They become immortal. They don't televise the second trial. No cameras this time, no panel debates. Just concrete walls, reinforced glass, and a cell so deep inside Arkham it feels buried in the city's bones. Arthur sits alone on the narrow cot, wrists scarred, ribs still aching where they drove him into the platform. Above him, Gotham keeps screaming. Protests haven't stopped. They've multiplied. But the chants have changed, not Joker. Harley. News filters down through guards who pretend not to listen. Coordinated strikes across financial districts. Broadcast hijackings signed with a crimson diamond. Carefully planned chaos. Not random. Surgical. Efficient. She isn't reacting anymore. She's orchestrating. Arthur smiles to himself in the dim light. The idea survived. Just like he said it would. Days blur into weeks. Isolation presses in, thick and suffocating. No music swells now. No fantasy stages. Just the hum of fluorescent lights and the distant echo of other inmates losing themselves in the dark. For the first time in years, the laughter doesn't come easily. Silence. One evening, footsteps stop outside his cell. Not guards. Too light. Too deliberate. A shadow stretches across the floor before she steps into view. Harley. No costume, no theatrics. Just her eyes sharper, calmer. Transformed. "They think I'm the threat now," she says softly. Arthur rises slowly from the cot. "Aren't you?" A faint smile touches her lips. "You taught me something on that rooftop." He tilts his head. "That symbols are powerful," she continues. "But symbols who step aside become myths." The words settle between them. She's not here to break him out. She's here to say goodbye. Above ground, her movement has evolved beyond clown masks and riots. She's exposing corruption, turning public fury into precision strikes against officials and institutions. Gotham isn't just burning anymore, it's restructuring. "You could have taken the spotlight," Arthur says quietly. "I did," she replies, "but I don't need it the way you did." That lands harder than any verdict. For a long moment, they just look at each other through reinforced glass. No recorder, no stage, no audience. Just two people who once mistook chaos for connection. "I love the idea of you," she admits. Arthur's lips twitch, not quite a smile. "Me too." Alarms buzz faintly somewhere in the distance, but neither of them reacts. This isn't an escape. It's an ending. Harley steps back first. "They'll keep you here," she says. "Hidden, controlled. But every time they say my name, they'll remember who started it." She turns to leave. "Harley." She pauses without facing him. He considers 100 punchlines, 1,000 dramatic exits. Instead, he says the only true thing left. Make it count. Her shoulders rise and fall once. Then she walks away, footsteps fading into the maze of Arkham corridors. Arthur sits back down on the cot. Silence returns. Above him, somewhere far beyond the concrete and steel, Gotham shifts again. Uneasy, unstable, alive. He closes his eyes, listening not for applause, not for laughter, but for the absence of it. Because the joke was never about him. It was about what the city was willing to become when someone finally held up a mirror. In the darkness of his cell, Arthur begins to laugh. softly at first, then fuller, echoing off stone walls that can contain his body but not the story. And somewhere across Gotham, under red and black banners fluttering against a storm-gray sky, Harley doesn't laugh at all. She leads. He did it once. He shocked the world. And now, Todd Phillips is back, not to repeat lightning in a bottle, but to bottle a different kind of storm. When Joker exploded into theaters in 2019, it became more than a comic book movie. It crossed $1 billion, won Joaquin Phoenix an Academy Award, and sparked cultural debates that refused to quiet down. Phillips, a director once known primarily for the Hangover trilogy, had reinvented himself as a provocateur of psychological drama. So when Warner Brothers officially greenlit Joker, Folie for 2024, the question wasn't whether lightning could strike twice. It was whether Phillips even wanted it to. Phillips's career trajectory matters here. He built his reputation on anarchic, boundary-pushing comedy films that thrived on discomfort and bad behavior. But Joker marked a pivot. Influenced heavily by Martin Scorsese's Taxi Driver and The King of Comedy, Phillips embraced gritty realism, 1970s character studies, and an almost defiantly somber tone. That film wasn't interested in superhero spectacle. It was interested in decay, personal, societal, psychological. And that choice defined him as more than a comedy director experimenting with darkness. It positioned him as an auteur willing to gamble everything on mood and character. With Folie Deux, Phillips faced a paradox. The first film felt complete, even terminal. Arthur Fleck's transformation into Joker culminated in operatic chaos, so why return? The answer seems embedded in the title itself. Folie Deux is a psychiatric term describing a shared delusion between two individuals. That alone signals Phillips' creative instinct: don't go bigger in scale, go deeper into madness. Instead of expanding into a sprawling DC universe, he doubles down on intimacy, psychology, and duality. Warner Brothers, for its part, treated this sequel as both prestige cinema and franchise anchor. The 2019 film proved that a standalone DC project, separate from shared universe obligations, could generate enormous profit and awards attention simultaneously. So the studio backed Phillips again, reportedly with a budget significantly larger than the first film's modest $55 million. The stakes increased. Expectations multiplied. But creatively, Phillips appeared determined to avoid turning Joker into a conventional franchise property. And then came the boldest choice of all, making it a musical. Not a Broadway spectacle in capes, not a jukebox superhero romp, but a psychological musical woven into the fabric of delusion. Casting Lady Gaga as Harley Quinn wasn't just stunt casting, it was thematic architecture. Gaga isn't simply an actor with pop star credentials. She's a performer whose entire career plays with identity, transformation, and theatrical self-construction. In a film about shared madness, who better to mirror Arthur Fleck than someone who understands performance as both mask and confession? Phillips's vision appears to lean into this duality. If the first film asked how a man becomes a symbol, the sequel seems poised to ask what happens when two symbols feed each other's delusions. The asylum setting, primarily Arkham State Hospital, suggests containment, not expansion. This isn't Gotham in chaos. It's two fractured psyches in close quarters. Claustrophobic, intimate, potentially operatic. There's also the question of tone. Phillips and cinematographer Lawrence Sher return, preserving visual continuity. The first film's muted color palette, sickly greens, washed-out yellows, oppressive grays, created a city that felt infected. If early production images are any indication, Folie Deux retains that grim aesthetic while adding heightened theatricality. The idea of musical sequences unfolding inside institutional walls creates tension between realism and fantasy. And Phillips thrives in that tension. He doesn't direct fantasy as escape. He directs it as delusion. Here's the risk. Sequels often inflate. Bigger action, higher stakes, more spectacle. But Phillips's approach suggests contraction instead of expansion. He seems less interested in comic book escalation and more in emotional escalation. What does love look like between two unstable minds? Is it romance, manipulation, or codependent annihilation? Those aren't blockbuster questions. They're psychological ones. And that's where Phillips is most dangerous as a filmmaker, when he's asking uncomfortable things under the guise of genre. There's also cultural context. The first Joker arrived in a moment of global unrest and online radicalization discourse. It became a lightning rod for debates about media influence and violence. Returning to this character in 2024 means navigating an even more fragmented media landscape. Phillips can't replicate the shock, so he shifts the conversation. Instead of solitary alienation, the sequel examines shared instability. Madness, but harmonized. And that word, harmonized, matters. Because musicals externalize emotion, they turn interior chaos into song. If Arthur Fleck's laughter was involuntary expression in the first film, perhaps music becomes voluntary expression in the second. That's evolution. That's experimentation. That's experimentation. That's Phillips refusing to make the same movie twice. Whether it works is another question. Ambition is not immunity, but ambition is interesting. And Joker, Folie, Deux radiates ambition from every creative decision. The genre shift, the casting, the asylum setting, the doubling down on psychological intensity. Todd Phillips didn't set out to create a franchise architect's legacy. He set out to disturb. Again. But a director's vision is only the spark. The blueprint, the actual mechanics of how madness turns into melody, was forged on the page. And that screenplay? That's where the real gamble begins. The gamble wasn't just tonal, it was structural. Because once you decide your psychological thriller sequel is also a musical, the script stops being a continuation. It becomes a reinvention. Todd Phillips once again co-wrote the screenplay with Scott Silver, his collaborator on the first Joker. That partnership matters. Silver's background leans heavily into character-driven drama. The Fighter, 8 Mile stories about fractured men navigating identity and performance. Arthur Fleck fits that lineage perfectly. But Folie, Deux required a new layer, not just a character study, but a duet. Two unstable perspectives braided together without losing coherence. That's a writing challenge most sequels wouldn't dare touch. The first film followed a relatively linear descent. We watched Arthur unravel step-by-step humiliation, rejection, violence, validation, cause and effect, pain and consequence, clean if brutal. The sequel complicates that structure. Set largely inside Arkham State Hospital after the events of the original, the narrative reportedly weaves courtroom drama with institutional confinement. Reality and fantasy blur more aggressively this time. And when music enters the equation, structure becomes fluid. Songs interrupt chronology. Emotion overrides logic. Delusion reframes memory. Here's the key. Musicals aren't pauses in story. They're accelerators of inner truth. In traditional Broadway logic, when emotions become too intense for dialogue, characters sing. Phillips flips that principle. In Folie, Deux, singing may signal distortion rather than clarity. When Arthur and Harley break into song, are we witnessing honesty or mutual self-deception? That tension is baked into the screenplay's foundation. The title itself, Shared Madness, demands narrative mirroring. Arthur's arc in the first film was about isolation. This script pivots to connection, but not healthy connection. Codependency. Amplification. Harley Quinn, often portrayed in comics as Joker's devoted accomplice, has historically been written as manipulated, infatuated, sometimes tragically devoted. Early reports suggest this version may avoid that simplicity. Instead of follower and leader, the screenplay seems to position them as co-authors of chaos, two performers feeding off each other's need for validation. That dynamic likely reshapes the traditional three-act structure. Act 1. Arthur institutionalized, mythologized by outsiders who see him as revolutionary symbol rather than broken man. Act 2. Harley enters, not merely as psychiatrist-turned-lover cliché, but as someone already destabilized. Act 3. Public spectacle, courtroom theatrics, identity performance elevated to operatic proportions. Even if details shift, the emotional architecture hinges on escalation through intimacy. And then there's dialogue. The first Joker used sparse, uncomfortable exchanges. Conversations felt stilted because Arthur couldn't connect. Laughter interrupted rhythm. Silences lingered. Expect the sequel's dialogue to feel different. With two theatrical personalities colliding, language may become heightened, almost performative. Harley Quinn, especially embodied by someone like Lady Gaga, invites flamboyance, not camp. Phillips avoids cartoonish tone but stylized expression. Words that feel rehearsed, delivered like lines on a stage inside their own minds. What fascinates me is how the script must balance audience expectation. Viewers know Harley and Joker as chaotic lovers. They expect volatility. They expect violence. But Phillips and Silver are unlikely to deliver fan service beats without subversion. The first film denied traditional comic book spectacle entirely. So if the sequel incorporates courtroom sequences or public reaction to Joker's crimes, it probably reframes them less as superhero myth and more as societal theater. The Joker isn't battling Batman here, he's battling narrative ownership. Is he monster? Martyr? Celebrity? There's also the question of scale. Studio sequels typically expand geography, new cities, new threats, bigger canvases. This script contracts inward. Arkham as primary setting suggests confinement. Limited physical space forces emotional intensity. Think One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, colliding with Cabaret Nightmare. Containment amplifies performance. Every hallway becomes stage. Every therapy session becomes rehearsal. And musicals require integration. Song selection, or original compositions, must justify existence. Random needle drops won't suffice. If characters sing, it must reflect psychological rupture or fantasy intrusion. That demands careful scripting. Lyrics become subtext. Melody becomes argument. Imagine a duet where both characters sing about love while visually orchestrating destruction, harmony masking toxicity. That's not easy writing. That's tonal tightrope. Another structural element hovering over the sequel is consequence. The first film ended with ambiguity. Arthur institutionalized again, perhaps fantasizing escape. The sequel must decide, is Joker an unreliable narrator? Are portions of the film imagined? Musicals naturally lend themselves to unreliable perception. A courtroom could transform mid-song into vaudeville spectacle. Guards could become backup dancers. The script's challenge is maintaining emotional stakes even when reality bends. What makes this particularly compelling is Phillips' resistance to comic book continuity constraints. This isn't tethered to a sprawling DC Universe timeline, no crossover obligations, no multiverse safety nets. That freedom allows the screenplay to remain insular. Focused. Disturbingly personal. While other superhero properties chase interconnected mythology, Folie Deux seems determined to stay small and psychologically dense. But ambition cuts both ways. Genre blending risks alienation. Some audiences want gritty realism again, others crave flamboyant comic chaos. The script attempts to satisfy neither fully, and that may be its boldest stroke. Instead of repeating 2019's formula, Phillips and Silver appear to interrogate it. What happens when a symbol gains a partner? When delusion becomes duet? When violence becomes choreography? If the first film asked how society creates a Joker, the sequel's writing asks a darker question. What happens when Joker finds someone who understands him? The answer lives not in explosions or superhero battles, but in chemistry. Because once the script locked in its dual focus, everything hinged on one volatile pairing. And that brings us to casting. The alchemy that turns risky writing into something unforgettable. Before a single frame was shot, one announcement detonated the internet. Lady Gaga was joining Joker, Folie Deux as Harley Quinn. That wasn't just casting news, that was a tonal declaration. Joaquin Phoenix returning as Arthur Fleck made sense. His Oscar-winning performance in 2019 wasn't just praised, it was seismic. He lost weight, contorted his body into angular fragility, built a laugh that felt torn from damaged lungs. Replacing him would have been impossible. But pairing him? That required audacity. Because whoever stepped into Harley's shoes wouldn't just be sharing screen time, she'd be sharing delusion, sharing spotlight, sharing madness. And Gaga thrives in spotlight. Her acting credentials aren't ornamental. A Star is Born proved she could anchor emotional drama without hiding behind pop persona. House of Gucci showed her appetite for operatic intensity. She understands theatricality. She understands transformation. More importantly, she understands performance as identity construction themes embedded in Joker's DNA. Casting her isn't stunt marketing, it's conceptual alignment. But here's what makes it fascinating. Harley Quinn has cinematic baggage. Margot Robbie's portrayal in the DC Extended Universe leaned into anarchic charm, hyperactive physicality, neon chaos. That version was kinetic, extroverted, almost cartoonishly elastic. Phillips's Gotham doesn't operate in cartoon logic, so Gaga's Harley needed reinvention. Less acrobat, more psychological mirror. Less glitter grenade, more fractured romantic. Chemistry tests between Phoenix and Gaga reportedly shaped final character dynamics, and that's critical. Phoenix is notoriously immersive, bordering on method extremity. He destabilizes scenes from within, murmured deliveries, unpredictable rhythms, physical tics. Acting opposite that energy requires fearlessness. Gaga, as a live performer accustomed to commanding stadiums, doesn't shrink under intensity, she meets it. That push-pull likely informed the screenplay's tonal calibration. Think about the risk Warner Brothers embraced here. Musicals demand vocal competence. Psychological dramas demand restraint. Combining both demands, performers who can oscillate between raw interiority and stylized expression without snapping the emotional thread. Phoenix isn't traditionally known as a singer, but he isn't inexperienced either. He sang live for Walk the Line, embodying Johnny Cash with gravel authenticity. Gaga, meanwhile, can weaponize her voice. The question isn't whether she can sing, it's whether she can make singing feel unstable. Casting extends beyond the leads, of course. Returning players like Zazie Beetz as Sophie Dumond add continuity, though her role's narrative direction remains guarded. Brendan Gleeson joins the ensemble, reportedly as an Arkham Authority figure, an inspired choice. Gleeson brings grounded gravitas. He can project institutional control while hinting at moral fatigue. Catherine Keener's addition suggests psychological complexity. She excels at playing characters whose calm surfaces conceal interior calculation. Here's where casting becomes architecture. In a story centered on shared delusion, supporting characters must function as reality anchors, or be swallowed by distortion. Arkham staff, legal authorities, fellow inmates, they aren't just background, they're pressure systems. Their casting shapes how grounded or surreal the film feels. Choose actors with theatrical flourish, and the world tilts operatic. Choose understated performers, and the lead's musical flights feel even more unhinged by contrast. There's also star power calculus. The first Joker succeeded partly because it felt like a serious film wearing comic book clothing. Phoenix carried that gravitas. Adding Gaga elevates celebrity visibility exponentially. 2 Oscar winners. 2 cultural icons. That synergy attracts new demographics. Music fans, prestige drama audiences, without relying on traditional superhero fan bases. Warner Brothers isn't just selling a sequel, they're selling an event. But casting isn't only about fame, it's about resonance. Gaga's public persona has always flirted with outsider identity, celebrating misfits, theatrical self-creation, vulnerability under spectacle. Arthur Fleck's arc hinges on society's rejection. Harley, in this iteration, likely embodies someone who sees Arthur not as monster but as mirror. That dynamic requires performers who can blur admiration and manipulation in a single glance. Here's something else to consider. Musical performance alters physicality. When actors sing, their bodies change, posture opens, breath deepens, expression heightens. Phoenix's Arthur in the first film was hunched, brittle, almost insect-like. If musical sequences invite expansion, literal chest opening, arms spreading theatricality, that physical contrast becomes storytelling. Casting actors capable of embodying both contraction and expansion isn't optional, it's essential. And then there's the industry whisper factor. Several high-profile actors were reportedly considered or speculated for Harley before Gaga's casting became official. Imagining alternate choices. Traditional dramatic actresses, perhaps, would have steered the film differently. Safer, less volatile. Gaga introduces unpredictability. You don't cast her to play quiet, you cast her to burn. The ensemble's balance ultimately determines whether this becomes a duet or a duel. If Phoenix retreats inward again, while Gaga projects outward, tension thrives. If both escalate theatrically, the film risks tonal overload. That's where Phillips' direction intersects with casting discipline. Performance modulation becomes crucial, because chemistry can't be edited into existence. It either crackles on camera, or it doesn't. And if the casting was the ignition, what truly matters is the fire itself, the performances, the gestures, the glances, the moments when song collides with psychosis. That's where this film will live or die, and that's exactly where we're headed next. There's a moment in the first Joker where Arthur dances alone in a grimy bathroom, blood still drying on his shoes. No dialogue, no applause, just movement, awkward, graceful, feral. That was Joaquin Phoenix announcing that this character speaks through his body as much as his words. Folie takes that idea and dares to amplify it. Phoenix doesn't return to Arthur Fleck as a victory lap. He returns like a man reopening a wound. Physically, he reportedly underwent transformation again, shedding weight, reshaping posture, rediscovering that brittle, angular silhouette that made Arthur look half-starved for attention and half-starved for food. But here's what matters more: evolution. In the first film, Arthur's movements were defensive, inward, shoulders curved, chin tucked, laughter bursting out like a malfunction. In the sequel, early glimpses suggest something altered. Confidence, perhaps, or delusion mistaken for confidence. The body seems looser. When he dances now, it's less accidental, more performative. That shift tracks with character psychology. Arthur ended the first film having tasted validation, warped, violent validation, but validation nonetheless. People cheered him, wore his mask, turned him into symbol. That changes a man. So Phoenix can't simply replay fragility. He must layer ego over instability. And that's a far more complicated performance. Here's what Phoenix does exceptionally well: micro-expressions. Watch his eyes. In 2019, they flickered with confusion and hunger. In this sequel, they reportedly hold something steadier, an unsettling calm. The kind of calm that doesn't mean peace. It means decision. When Arthur locks eyes with Harley for the first time, you don't just see attraction, you see recognition. Predator recognizing predator, or wounded soul recognizing echo. Phoenix leaves it ambiguous. That ambiguity is the performance. Now add music to the equation. Phoenix isn't a polished vocalist. That's precisely why his singing works. In Walk the Line, he didn't aim for Johnny Cash perfection. He aimed for emotional truth. Expect the same here. If Arthur sings, it likely won't be pristine. It may crack, drift off key, strain. And that imperfection becomes character texture, because Joker doesn't express through beauty. He expresses through rupture. Then there's Lady Gaga. Playing Harley Quinn in this tonal universe requires surgical calibration. Too flamboyant, and the film collapses into parody. Too restrained, and Harley loses magnetism. Gaga's performance reportedly threads that needle by grounding Harley's instability and yearning. This isn't just a woman seduced by chaos. It's a woman desperate to be seen inside it. Vocally, she holds obvious advantage. But here's the trick: power must sometimes be withheld. If every musical number becomes a showcase of vocal dominance, Harley overwhelms Arthur and the balance fractures. So the performance likely oscillates. Some songs intimate, breathy, conspiratorial. Others explosive. Not diva mode. Delusion mode. Delusion mode. Chemistry between Phoenix and Gaga becomes the film's emotional engine. And chemistry here doesn't mean romance in the conventional sense. It means unpredictability. Scenes where you're unsure whether they'll kiss or combust. In shared musical sequences, harmony might feel seductive at first. Two voices blending seamlessly before lyrics betray darker undercurrents. Love songs that sound like war plans. There's also physical interplay. Gaga is known for commanding stage presence through posture and eye contact. Harley, in this iteration, may use stillness as weapon. Imagine her standing perfectly composed while Arthur spirals, then slowly mirroring his rhythm until you realize she's guiding it. Performance becomes choreography of control. One of the most intriguing acting challenges lies in tonal shifts between reality and fantasy. Musical sequences may exist entirely within Arthur and Harley's shared delusion. That demands performance modulation. In real, Arkham scenes, gestures smaller, voices lower. In fantasy, expression heightened. But transitions can't feel like flipping a switch. They must bleed into each other. A smile that starts grounded and stretches just slightly too wide. A note held half-second longer than natural. And here's where Phoenix shines: discomfort. He's unafraid of ugliness, of awkward pauses, of letting scenes breathe in ways mainstream films often trim away. Gaga, meanwhile, understands spectacle. The collision of those instincts. Raw discomfort meeting theatrical precision could create something electric, or volatile, possibly both. Award speculation inevitably surrounds performances like these. Phoenix already holds the Oscar for Arthur. Gaga holds one for songwriting and nominations for acting. But awards aside, what matters is risk. Both actors step into territory where failure would be public and loud. Musical psychological drama sequels aren't safe career moves, they're bets. Supporting players orbit this central fire. Brendan Gleeson's grounded authority likely contrasts sharply with the lead's escalating mania. Catherine Keener's measured presence could function as narrative ballast. But make no mistake, this is a two-hander at heart, a duet of instability. Here's the ultimate question performance must answer. Do we believe this love? Not in moral terms, in emotional terms. Do we believe these two broken people see something real in each other? If yes, the tragedy deepens. If not, the spectacle rings hollow. Because shared madness only works if it feels shared, and performances don't exist in vacuum. They're framed, colored, textured by the world around them. The walls of Arkham, the costumes, the shadows swallowing corridors. Which brings us to the physical canvas these actors inhabit, the crafted world that either grounds their delusion or amplifies it. Arkham has never looked inviting. In Folie, Deux, it doesn't even try. Production design becomes the silent third character in this story, breathing through cracked tiles, humming through fluorescent lights, watching from behind reinforced glass. Returning production designer Mark Friedberg understands that Gotham in Phillips's universe isn't comic book architecture, it's urban rot. In the first film, streets felt damp even when dry. Apartments looked like they smelled of neglect. Here, confinement sharpens that decay into something colder. Arkham State Hospital isn't gothic fantasy. It's institutional gray, cinder block walls, narrow corridors, windows too small to feel like freedom but too large to ignore. Friedberg reportedly leaned into mid-20th century psychiatric facility aesthetics, metal bed frames bolted to floors, peeling paint that once pretended to be calming green. The kind of place designed less for healing than for containment. And that design philosophy matters. Because if this film is about shared delusion, the environment must feel rigid enough to push back against it. Color palette becomes psychological language. The first Joker lived in sickly greens and nicotine yellows, draining vibrancy from Gotham. Early glimpses of the sequel suggest that Arkham continues that palette but punctures it during musical sequences. When Arthur and Harley slip into fantasy, hues reportedly bloom deep reds, stage light ambers, exaggerated contrast. It's not just aesthetic flourish. It's emotional differentiation. Reality feels drained. Delusion feels saturated. Costume design follows the same duality. Arthur's institutional clothing likely strips him of iconography at first, plain uniforms, muted fabrics, anonymity enforced, but identity always finds cracks. Subtle details. A too bright sock, a smudged lip of color, the suggestion of clown aesthetic creeping back signal resistance. And when musical numbers erupt, costuming may swing theatrical, not superhero flamboyant, but heightened. Suits sharper, silhouettes bolder, fabric catching light like it wants to be seen. Harley's wardrobe presents its own challenge. Strip away the comic book red and black jester suit. Strip away Margot Robbie's glitter chaos. What remains? Possibly something deceptively grounded at first professional attire, muted tones, a suggestion of clinical authority. Then, as delusion deepens, color infiltrates. Perhaps red accents appear gradually. Perhaps patterns grow more expressive. Costume as psychological progression. Props carry narrative weight too. Arkham spaces likely bristle with objects designed to suppress individuality. Clipboard stacks, medication trays, institutional signage. But in a musical, even mundane objects can transform. A hallway mop becomes a dance partner. A courtroom microphone becomes spotlight. That transformation doesn't require CGI excess. It requires intentional staging. Friedberg's design must support both grounded realism and theatrical distortion without snapping credibility. Spatial composition matters enormously in confined settings. Narrow hallways create visual compression, characters trapped in frame. But musicals crave openness, room to move, to spin, to project. So design likely incorporates larger communal rooms, therapy spaces, recreation halls, courtroom chambers. These become performance arenas. Think cabaret energy inside bureaucratic architecture. Freedom imagined within walls that deny it. Texture plays a role often overlooked. Surfaces in the first film felt tactile cracked plaster, worn upholstery, grimy stair rails. That physical roughness anchored Arthur's world. In Folie, Deux, similar attention to material realism prevents musical elements from floating away into abstraction. When Arthur slides along a wall mid-song, you should almost feel the chipped paint under his palm. Lighting integration between production design and cinematography becomes crucial. Fluorescent institutional lighting casts unforgiving shadows. It flattens faces, drains warmth. But when fantasy intrudes, practical lights might shift, bulbs flickering into stage spots, barred windows projecting theatrical patterns across floors. Design provides the canvas. Cinematography animates it. Together, they orchestrate psychological space. One fascinating layer is how Arkham contrasts with public spaces like courtrooms. Courtrooms traditionally symbolize order, logic, structured justice. In this story, they may become theater, elevated benches like stages, jury boxes like audience seating. The design likely leans into that irony, architecture meant for rational deliberation hosting emotional spectacle. The film's commitment to practical environments rather than heavy CGI maintains tonal integrity. Phillips' Gotham thrives on tangible grit. Even if fantasy sequences include stylized flourishes, grounding them in built sets rather than digital backdrops preserves texture. You can't fake institutional claustrophobia convincingly with green screens. You build it. You trap your actors inside it. Let the walls inform performance. There's also symbolic layering and color repetition. Green, traditionally associated with Joker iconography, may appear not as flamboyant branding, but as institutional residue. A recurring shade in walls, lighting, medical equipment, madness baked into infrastructure. Red, often tied to Harley, could puncture that green gradually, visually representing contagion of shared delusion. Production design in a film like this doesn't scream for attention. It suffocates quietly. It frames faces in corners. It narrows escape routes. And then, when music erupts, it opens just enough to let fantasy breathe before snapping shut again. Because the world must feel oppressive for delusion to feel like liberation. But walls and costumes are only half the equation. How the camera navigates those corridors. How lenses capture saturation shifts. How movement tracks dance within confinement. That's where visual storytelling sharpens. The sets are built. The colors chosen. The textures layered. Now watch what the camera does with them. If the first film moved like a slow psychological bleed, Folie Deux moves like a waltz on cracked glass. Lawrence Sher returns as cinematographer, and that continuity matters more than most audiences realize. Sher didn't just shoot Joker, he defined its visual grammar. The shallow depth of field isolating Arthur in crowds. The oppressive close-ups that forced us into uncomfortable intimacy. The handheld instability during moments of emotional fracture. Bringing Sher back ensures that even as the sequel experiments with musical form, it remains visually tethered to the same diseased Gotham. But here's the evolution. Musicals demand choreography not just from actors, but from the camera. In the first film, the camera often observed Arthur. It followed him down staircases, lingered as he sat in silence, hovered like an uneasy witness. In Folie Deux, when song erupts, observation likely transforms into participation. Tracking shots may grow more fluid, movements more deliberate. Instead of shaky realism, we might see controlled dolly glides, camera dancing with the performers rather than documenting them. Aspect ratio plays its own quiet role. The original film used a 1.85,001 frame, slightly taller than the ultra-wide superhero standard. That choice created intimacy. Less horizontal sprawl, more vertical pressure. If the sequel maintains that ratio, musical numbers unfold within a frame that feels contained rather than sprawling. Big emotion trapped in a box. That tension is delicious. Lighting shifts become psychological cues. Arkham's baseline illumination likely relies on harsh overhead fluorescence. Flat, institutional. But when fantasy bleeds in, light can carve faces differently. Strong key lights isolating Arthur and Harley against darker backgrounds, creating chiaroscuro contrast reminiscent of 1970s cinema. Light revealing and obscuring simultaneously. Think, stage spotlight piercing a sea of shadow. Sher's collaboration with Phillips often favors practical lighting, meaning visible light sources within the frame. Lamps, ceiling fixtures, windows. That realism grounds scenes. In a musical context, practical lights can evolve mid-shot. A flickering fluorescent hum might swell into rhythmic pulse. A courtroom chandelier might blaze brighter as voices rise. The shift from mundane to theatrical can happen without cutting away, just through modulation of exposure and color temperature. Lens choice quietly shapes emotional proximity. Longer lenses compress space, making walls feel closer, suffocating characters. Wider lenses exaggerate movement, distort edges slightly, heighten physicality during dance. Expect Sher to alternate strategically. When Arthur feels cornered, telephoto compression traps him. When delusion liberates him into song, wider glass allows movement to breathe, even if only for a moment. Camera movement in musical sequences becomes choreography partner. A slow 360-degree tracking shot around Arthur and Harley mid-duet can suggest unity or entrapment. Rotation without escape. If Cher employs Steadicam or stabilized rigs, the fluidity contrasts sharply with the handheld tremors of reality scenes. That contrast becomes visual punctuation. Stable camera equals shared fantasy. Unstable camera equals fractured reality. Color grading deserves attention too. The first film's post-production grading drained vibrancy deliberately. Skin tones leaned pallid. Cityscapes looked nicotine-stained. In the sequel, grading likely bifurcates. Institutional scenes remain desaturated. Musical sequences bloom with richer contrast, deeper reds, sharper blacks, warmer highlights. Not candy-colored fantasy, but intensified emotion. The grade becomes emotional thermostat. And here's where Cher excels, close-ups that feel invasive. Phoenix's face under Cher's lens becomes terrain, every twitch visible, every flicker of doubt magnified. In shared scenes with Gaga, the camera may alternate between isolating singles and tight two-shots, forcing both faces into the same frame, proximity undeniable. Two performances sharing oxygen. Two delusions reflected in each other's pupils. Editing rhythm intersects with cinematography as well. The first film favored longer takes, allowing discomfort to linger. Musicals often incorporate rhythmic cutting aligned with tempo. The sequel likely blends both. Reality scenes breathe in, extended takes. Musical numbers tighten editing to match melody. Cut on beat, or intentionally cut off beat to create unease. Editing becomes emotional percussion. One particularly intriguing possibility lies in visual motifs. The first Joker used staircases as recurring imagery, ascension and descent mirroring Arthur's psychological state. If staircases reappear, how are they shot now? Is Arthur still climbing alone, or descending hand-in-hand with Harley? Camera angle, low-angle empowerment versus high-angle vulnerability tells that story without dialogue. There's also the interplay between confinement and movement. Arkham's corridors restrict lateral motion. So, vertical framing shooting upward through barred windows, downward from surveillance angles, can emphasize surveillance and entrapment. During fantasy sequences, those same spaces might feel wider simply through lens and lighting adjustments. Nothing physically changes. Perception does. Visual effects integration, if present, likely remains restrained. Phillips' world resists CGI spectacle. If hallucinations manifest visually, background dancers appearing, walls dissolving into stage curtains, they're probably achieved through practical staging enhanced subtly in post. Keeping effects grounded maintains tonal integrity. What fascinates me most is how Cher might visualize shared delusion. In the first film, Arthur's fantasies like imagined talk show appearances were framed convincingly real until ruptured. In this sequel, when two characters share fantasy, how does the camera signal subjectivity? Perhaps subtle depth of field shifts isolate them from environment. Perhaps background extras move in choreographed synchronicity while foreground remains intimate. Cinematography becomes psychological proof. Because ultimately, the camera decides what's real. And when you pair that visual orchestration with music, actual music, swelling and receding, invading silence, you create a sensory collision. The eye sees distortion. The ear feels it. And that brings us to the heartbeat of this film. The score, the songs, the soundscape that turns madness into melody. In the first Joker, music didn't comfort you. It unsettled you. Hildur Guðnadóttir's Oscar-winning score was less melody, more emotional undertow, low cellos vibrating like a warning you couldn't quite name. It didn't tell you how to feel. It made you feel trapped inside Arthur's chest. Bringing her back for Folie was essential, especially once the project leaned into musical territory, because this isn't a jukebox spectacle, it's a psychological symphony. And that distinction matters. Guðnadóttir's approach has always been texture first. She builds atmosphere through sustained notes, minor key progressions, and sonic weight rather than hummable themes. In the first film, the cello often felt like Arthur's spine bending, straining, barely holding together. In the sequel, that instrumental language likely evolves into something more layered. Two psyches mean two tonal identities. Arthur's brooding low strings may now intertwine with melodic elements representing Harley, perhaps piano, perhaps breathier orchestration. Harmony that feels seductive at first, then dissonant. Because harmony can lie. The bold creative swing, of course, is integrating full musical numbers. Early reports suggest a blend of original compositions and reinterpretations of existing songs. That hybrid approach is risky. Lean too heavily on recognizable tracks and the film risks feeling like a stylized cover album. Lean too abstract and audiences may struggle to anchor emotionally. The key is integration. Songs must feel like psychological events, not interruptions. Here's what fascinates me. In traditional musicals, songs externalize clarity. Characters sing because emotion overflows. In Folie, Deux, songs may signal distortion. When Arthur and Harley sing together, are they confessing truth or reinforcing shared illusion? The music becomes unreliable narrator. Lush orchestration masking violent subtext. Romantic duets underscored by lyrical hints of chaos. Lady Gaga's involvement adds another layer. She isn't just an actor who can sing. She's an artist who understands theatrical crescendo. Expect vocal dynamics to mirror psychological arcs. Soft, almost whispered verses giving way to explosive refrains. But not every number needs to climax. Some may feel intimate. Two voices in a near-empty room, the sound design stripping away instrumentation until you hear breath between lines. Phoenix's voice will likely contrast sharply with Gaga's. Rougher, less polished. That contrast becomes character texture. When their voices blend, the imbalance might create tension rather than smooth harmony. Imperfect unison can feel more unsettling than flawless duet. Sound design extends beyond music. Arkham has its own sonic identity. Distant doors clanging, fluorescent hum, echoing footsteps down sterile corridors. Those ambient sounds form baseline reality. When musical fantasy intrudes, those noises might morph rhythmically. The hum of a light becoming percussion. The clang of a gate landing on beat. Diegetic sound. Audio that exists within the world, blurring into non-diegetic score. That blur is psychological storytelling. Silence, too, becomes weapon. Guthnadottir understands restraint. In the first film, silence often preceded eruption. In the sequel, imagine a musical buildup that cuts abruptly to quiet mid-phrase. No orchestral swell, just breathing. That kind of sonic rug pull destabilizes audience expectation. You anticipate Broadway catharsis. Instead, you get vacuum. Courtroom sequences likely offer particularly rich sonic contrast. Courtrooms are structured environments, measured speech, controlled acoustics. When song erupts there, it feels transgressive. Imagine a judge's gavel striking in rhythm, gradually absorbed into orchestration, or a jury's murmur swelling into choral backing. Music turning institutional order into theatrical spectacle. Mixing choices will determine immersion. Will vocals feel studio clean or intentionally raw? If Phillips leans toward realism even in fantasy, vocals may carry slight environmental echo, grounded within Arkham's acoustics, rather than floating in polished musical ether. That subtle imperfection preserves tonal cohesion with the gritty world established in 2019. There's also thematic resonance in song selection. If classic standards are reinterpreted, lyrical content likely mirrors character psychology. Love songs reframed as obsession, hopeful melodies delivered with ironic detachment. Lyrics can function as commentary. A cheerful tune underscoring dark imagery creates cognitive dissonance. That dissonance is pure Joker territory. And then there's rhythm. Editing rhythms in musical sequences often sync tightly with tempo, but this film may resist predictability. Cuts arriving slightly offbeat create unease. Holding on a close-up longer than melody forces viewers to sit with expression rather than spectacle. Music drives pacing, yes, but pacing doesn't have to obey music obediently. What ultimately defines the audio landscape of Folie Deux is contrast. Low, oppressive cello drones against soaring vocal lines, institutional silence against orchestral swell, harmony against dissonance, love lyric against violent implication. If the first film felt like a dirge, this sequel feels like a twisted cabaret. But sound and image are only part of the story. Behind every controlled note and carefully framed shot lies chaos of a different kind. The real-world production. Tight schedules, creative disagreements, logistical nightmares. the invisible battle to make ambition tangible. And sometimes, the stories behind the camera are just as dramatic as the ones unfolding on screen. Big movies often look controlled, polished, inevitable. They aren't. Behind Joker, Folie, Deux sits a production journey that feels almost as volatile as its subject matter. Ambitious, closely watched, and constantly balancing risk with precision. When Warner Bros. Rubberide officially confirmed the sequel in 2022, expectations weren't just high, they were microscopic. Every casting rumor trended. Every set photo sparked debate. This wasn't a quiet greenlight, it was a global event. Filming began in late 2022, primarily in New York and Los Angeles, with additional location work shaping Arkham's exterior presence. Shooting in New York again wasn't accidental. The first film used the city's gridded staircases, subways, alleyways, to build Gotham's tactile realism. Returning there maintained continuity. But this time, production had to merge that grounded urban texture with choreographed musical staging. That's a logistical tightrope. Musical sequences complicate schedules dramatically. You're not just capturing dialogue coverage. You're coordinating choreography, playback systems, lighting shifts, and camera movement in precise synchronization. Every take demands alignment between departments. If one element falters, missed step, mistimed light cue, camera drift, you reset. Time bleeds. Budget strain. And this sequel's budget reportedly ballooned far beyond the original's modest scale. The first Joker thrived partly because it felt intimate lean production, controlled risk. With Folie, Deux, studio confidence meant more resources. But more resources also mean more scrutiny. When a film costs significantly more, every creative gamble becomes financial calculus. Todd Phillips' directing style reportedly remains immersive but disciplined. Joaquin Phoenix is known for staying deeply in character between takes, sometimes altering line readings spontaneously. On the first film, that unpredictability occasionally forced crew adjustments. In a musical environment, spontaneity becomes even more complicated. Choreography and camera blocking don't love improvisation, so the challenge? Preserve Phoenix's organic volatility while maintaining technical precision. Lady Gaga brings her own performance ecosystem. She's accustomed to large-scale production environments, concert tours where timing is everything. That background likely smoothed musical logistics. But unlike concert performance, film acting demands repetition under microscopic scrutiny. Hitting the same emotional note across multiple takes while sustaining vocal quality isn't just talent, it's stamina. Weather and public visibility posed additional hurdles. Shooting in urban environments means crowds. And when your leads are Joaquin Phoenix and Lady Gaga, secrecy becomes almost impossible. Set photos leaked early. Gaga and Phoenix in coordinated costuming outside courthouse steps, igniting online speculation about narrative direction. Production had to navigate not just filmmaking, but cultural conversation happening in real time. One of the most intriguing production challenges likely involved tonal calibration during filming. Actors performing heightened musical material inside drab institutional sets could easily tip into parody if not anchored carefully. Phillips's job on set wasn't just blocking scenes, it was constant recalibration. Too theatrical? Pull it back. Too restrained? Let it breathe. That balance can't wait for editing. It starts on the day. There's also the question of live versus pre-recorded vocals. Some modern musicals rely heavily on studio-recorded tracks played back on set. Others favor live capture for authenticity. Given Phillips' commitment to realism, there's speculation that at least portions were performed live. Live singing adds rawness. It also adds risk. Imperfect breath control. Environmental noise interference? But imperfection fits this world. Reports from the set suggested a relatively focused atmosphere, less chaotic than one might assume for a film about madness. Phoenix, while intense, has described his collaboration with Phillips as deeply trusting. That trust becomes vital when navigating experimental territory. A director can push further when actor and crew feel secure in shared vision. Post-production likely presented its own mountain. Editing a film that shifts between grounded drama and musical expression demands rhythm discipline. Too abrupt and audiences disconnect. Too gradual and energy dissipates. Test screenings, if conducted, would have provided early audience feedback on tonal coherence. And with a high-profile release date locked in, schedule pressure intensifies as release approaches. The 2023 industry strikes, both writers and actors, cast a shadow over many productions during that period. While principal photography wrapped before peak disruption, promotional strategies likely shifted. Marketing a musical, psychological drama hybrid starring two global icons during labor turbulence adds complexity to rollout timing. Here's the thing about production stories. Audiences rarely see the near misses. The choreography that took weeks to perfect. The courtroom sequence that required dozens of extras hitting cues precisely. The late-night lighting adjustments to ensure fantasy sequences didn't betray realism. The endless micro-decisions invisible in Final Cut. And sometimes, in films this ambitious, there are reshoots, not as failure, but as refinement. Additional photography can tighten narrative clarity or adjust pacing after initial edits reveal imbalance. If Folie Deux underwent that process, it would align with standard studio practice for tentpole releases. Precision isn't accidental, it's iterative. By the time cameras stopped rolling, what remained wasn't just a sequel. It was a genre hybrid shaped by months of choreography, negotiation, recalibration, and risk tolerance. But no matter how intense the production, a film ultimately faces one unforgiving metric: numbers. Opening weekend, worldwide gross, profit margins, cultural appetite translated into box office data. And for a sequel to a billion-dollar phenomenon, those numbers carry weight heavier than Arkham's walls. When Joker crossed the billion-dollar mark in 2019, it rewrote the rulebook. A dark, R-rated character study. No Batman, no shared universe safety net, grossed over $1 billion worldwide against a reported $55 million budget. That wasn't just success, that was anomaly. Studios spent years trying to replicate that formula. Prestige tone plus franchise IP equals cultural lightning. So when Folie Deux was announced, the financial expectations weren't cautious. They were enormous. But here's the complication. Lightning rarely strikes twice the same way. The sequel reportedly carried a production budget dramatically higher than the original, widely cited in industry circles as north of $150 million. Add global marketing, and total investment likely soared well beyond that. This wasn't a scrappy gamble anymore. It was a high-stakes studio bet blending art house sensibility with blockbuster economics. That changes the box office math immediately. Opening weekend numbers for a film like this become more than bragging rights. They're narrative control. A strong debut signals audience curiosity about the musical pivot. A softer-than-expected opening fuels discourse about genre miscalculation. And with two global stars, Joaquin Phoenix and Lady Gaga, the demographic spread becomes crucial. Comic book fans, prestige drama audiences, Gaga's music fan base, awards watchers. The studio needed convergence. International markets also play a decisive role. The first Joker thrived globally, particularly in Europe and Asia, where character-driven cinema often finds strong footholds. But musicals can travel unevenly across territories. Cultural appetite for stylized, song-driven storytelling varies. Subtitling versus dubbing impacts lyrical nuance. A courtroom duet might land differently in Paris than in Seoul. That unpredictability complicates projections. There's also the franchise paradox. The original film felt self-contained. It didn't demand a sequel. That worked in its favor. Curiosity flourished. Sequels, by contrast, face comparison immediately, not just to their predecessor's quality, but to its numbers. When audiences walk in, they carry memory, and memory shapes expectation. Box office legs, how a film performs beyond opening weekend, matter deeply here. The first Joker displayed remarkable staying power, holding strong week to week. Word of mouth amplified cultural conversation. For Folie Deux, reception likely dictates trajectory. If audiences embrace the musical experiment, repeat viewings follow. If tone divides, drop-offs accelerate. Another factor, rating and accessibility. An R rating, if maintained, narrows teenage turnout compared to PG-13 comic book fare. But that same rating also signals continuity of grit, preserving brand identity established in 2019. Diluting tone for broader rating would have risked alienating core fans. Maintaining it means betting on adult audiences again. Streaming and ancillary markets further complicate commercial evaluation. Post-theatrical windows now influence total revenue differently than in 2019. Premium video on demand, digital rentals, eventual streaming platform presence, all extend profitability timeline. A film doesn't need to hit $1 billion again to succeed financially. It needs to justify its expanded budget relative to global performance and downstream revenue. And then there's cultural currency. Not every film's success is measured purely in dollars. Awards buzz, meme circulation, soundtrack streaming numbers all contribute to financial ecosystem. If musical tracks chart or trend, they feed visibility. Gaga's involvement makes soundtrack performance particularly relevant. Songs becoming cultural moments translates to marketing amplification. But let's confront the obvious. Surpassing $1 billion twice with a psychological musical sequel would be extraordinary. Even approaching that figure would cement the project as rare franchise evolution success. Falling significantly short wouldn't automatically mean failure, but it would shift studio strategy conversations about future DC standalone experiments. Warner Bros. Entered this release cycle during broader corporate restructuring and DC brand recalibration. Every high-profile project carries symbolic weight. A strong commercial showing reinforces confidence in filmmaker-driven, standalone DC narratives. A weak one nudges studios back towards safer shared universe formulas. What fascinates me most is how this film's financial story intersects with its artistic ambition. Musicals are inherently risky in mainstream markets unless tied to established brands or family audiences. Psychological dramas are niche by default. Combining both under a comic book banner is audacious. The box office becomes referendum not just on this film, but on genre hybridization itself. And sometimes, commercial performance shapes legacy as much as quality does. But numbers only tell part of the story. Because after opening weekend headlines fade, another conversation begins. Critics weigh in, audiences argue, social media fractures into camps, awards campaigns launch, financial success determines whether a film thrives, critical reception determines how it's remembered. And for a project this polarizing by design, that conversation was never going to be quiet. Critics didn't walk into Joker, Folie neutrally. They walked in armed, with memory, with expectations, with skepticism. The first film premiered at Venice and won the Golden Lion. That early festival validation reframed what could have been dismissed as comic book provocation into serious cinema. Awards followed. Phoenix's Oscar win cemented legitimacy. So the sequel didn't just arrive as a franchise continuation, it arrived as a cultural sequel to an Oscar-winning phenomenon. And that changes the temperature of every review. Initial critical reactions inevitably split along fault lines that were visible the moment the musical angle was announced. Some praised the audacity. A mainstream studio sequel pivoting into psychological musical territory? That's not algorithmic filmmaking. That's risk. For critics fatigued by formulaic superhero entries, that ambition alone carried weight. Others questioned necessity. The first film felt complete terminal even. Revisiting Arthur risked diluting impact. For some reviewers, the very existence of a sequel felt like contradiction to the original's self-contained tragedy. That tension-colored responses before a single note was sung. Performance evaluations dominated much of the critical discourse. Joaquin Phoenix, reprising an Oscar-winning role, faced near-impossible comparison to himself. Some critics admired his evolution, noting a shift from pure vulnerability to unsettling composure. Others argued the performance felt more mannered this time, as though self-awareness of iconography crept in. When an actor's portrayal becomes cultural shorthand, subtlety becomes harder to preserve. Lady Gaga's Harley Quinn became the lightning rod. Many praised her ability to recalibrate the character away from comic book flamboyance into psychological codependency. Her vocal performances drew attention, especially in sequences where emotional fragility undercut theatrical polish. But detractors questioned tonal cohesion, arguing that musical flourishes occasionally fractured the grounded realism established in 2019. And here's where the critic-audience divide often widens. General audiences approach sequels differently. Some crave expansion, others crave repetition of what worked. When Folie delivered neither in conventional form, reactions naturally polarized. Social media amplified extremes. One camp celebrated boldness, calling it one of the most daring studio blockbusters in years. Another labeled it indulgent, accusing Phillips of prioritizing provocation over narrative clarity. Aggregate scores, Rotten Tomatoes, Metacritic inevitably became shorthand in headlines, percentages reducing nuance to numbers. But beneath those metrics, the recurring themes in reviews told a richer story. ambition versus coherence, innovation versus indulgence, operatic intensity versus emotional distance. Award season buzz followed cautiously. Musical performances often gain traction in acting categories, especially when tied to previous winners. Gaga's presence fueled speculation in Best Actress conversations. Phoenix's return reopened Best Actor discourse. Technical categories, score, cinematography, production design, entered the mix as well. Whether nominations materialized or not, the conversation itself reinforced the film's positioning as prestige project rather than disposable sequel. Culturally, the film reignited debates that trailed the original. Media responsibility, glamour versus critique of violence, representation of mental illness. But the sequel's focus on shared delusion shifted tone. Instead of solitary alienation as societal indictment, the narrative explored codependent amplification. That thematic pivot reframed discourse. Critics debated whether the film critiqued toxic romance or inadvertently romanticized it. Memes surfaced quickly. Visuals from musical sequences repurposed across platforms, some affectionate, some ironic. In the digital age, memeability influences cultural staying power. A courtroom duet clipped into 10-second loops spreads faster than a nuanced character monologue. Long-term reevaluation may prove particularly interesting. The first Joker underwent its own critical recalibration post-release. Initial polarization softened into broader acknowledgement of craft. Folie may follow similar trajectory. Films that experiment often age differently than films that play safe. Time can transform divisive into visionary or confirm excess. What's undeniable is this: the sequel refused invisibility. It sparked conversation. It provoked debate. It demanded reaction. In an era where many franchise entries blur together, being polarizing is almost a form of success. But critical response and box office data only capture immediate impact. The deeper question lingers beneath headlines and percentages. What is this film actually about? Not plot, not numbers, not reviews, themes, legacy. What Folie ultimately says about love, identity, performance, and whether it earns its place alongside its predecessor in cultural memory. That's where final judgment lives. And that's exactly where we're heading next. At its core, Joker, Folie isn't about crime. It isn't even really about chaos. It's about performance. Arthur Fleck was always performing. In the first film, he performed normalcy awkward smiles, forced laughter, rehearsed talk show fantasies. Society demanded a mask, and when that mask cracked, the Joker persona emerged as counter-performance. Not sanity restored, not truth revealed, just a new act. The sequel deepens that idea by introducing someone who doesn't just witness the performance, she joins it. Shared delusion isn't merely psychological diagnosis here, it's theatrical collaboration. Arthur alone was tragic. Arthur with Harley becomes operatic. Their connection thrives not on stability, but on mutual reinforcement of narrative. They tell each other who they are. They validate each other's mythology. And in doing so, they erase the boundary between authenticity and invention. Love, in this film, feels less like affection and more like co-authorship. That's the first major theme, identity as constructed myth. Throughout both films, Arthur wrestles with being unseen, ridiculed, ignored. In Folie he's no longer invisible, he's infamous. The world has projected meaning onto him. Harley, meanwhile, sees not just a man, but a symbol. And when two people fall in love with symbols rather than souls, intimacy becomes distortion. They don't love each other as flawed humans. They love each other as amplified personas. That's dangerous. Because the second theme is validation as addiction. Arthur's descent in 2019 was fueled by rejection. In 2024, it's fueled by affirmation. Applause, attention, admiration, even from one person, can be as intoxicating as any drug. The film suggests that being seen, finally, doesn't heal trauma. It can calcify it. Shared madness becomes feedback loop. You hurt, I celebrate it. I hurt, you glorify it. Round and round. And here's the uncomfortable question the film raises. Is their connection genuine? On surface level, yes. They share vulnerability. They share marginalization. They share alienation. But scratch deeper and you see performance layered over pain. When they sing together, harmony sounds beautiful. But harmony doesn't equal health. Two broken notes can still align musically. The third theme circles back to society's role. The first film critiqued systemic neglect. underfunded social services, media sensationalism, public cruelty. The sequel shifts lens slightly. Now, society becomes audience, courtrooms as theater, news coverage as spectacle, public fascination with infamy. The Joker isn't just created by neglect, he's sustained by attention. And Harley? She embodies that shift. She doesn't discover Arthur in obscurity, she discovers him post-myth. That changes power dynamics. Is she rescuing him, or aligning herself with notoriety? Is there romance rebellion or branding? The film doesn't hand easy answers. It presents the performance and lets discomfort linger. There's also tragedy woven through all of this. Because beneath theatricality, Arthur remains fragile. Beneath Harley's poise, vulnerability flickers. When fantasy fades, when music cuts, when lights dim, you glimpse loneliness. That's where the film's emotional core lives. Not in spectacle, in silence after spectacle. As for legacy, Folie Deux occupies unusual territory in comic book cinema. It refuses franchise expansion. It rejects crossover temptation. It doesn't build toward larger universes. It tunnels inward. Whether audiences embrace that will shape its long-term reputation. But artistically, it stands as one of the boldest genre pivots attached to mainstream IP in recent memory. Does it surpass the original? That depends on what you valued in 2019. If you loved the purity of Arthur's solitary descent, the sequel's operatic excess may feel destabilizing. If you wanted evolution risk, musical experimentation, psychological intimacy, this film delivers something few sequels dare attempt. For me, its power lies in discomfort. It doesn't soothe. It doesn't provide cathartic moral clarity. It asks whether love can exist inside shared delusion and whether applause can be more destructive than rejection. It's messy, intentionally so, at times indulgent, at times hauntingly precise. But safe? Never. And that may be its greatest achievement. In a cinematic landscape dominated by interconnected formulas and nostalgia recycling, Joker Folie Deux chooses volatility. It gambles on audience patience. It risks tonal whiplash. It fuses cabaret with confinement. Not every note lands perfectly, but the attempt itself feels radical. Arthur Fleck once danced alone in a bathroom, blood drying, music swelling from somewhere deep inside him. Now he dances with someone else. Whether that duet is romance or requiem, that's up to you. There's a cruel irony at the heart of Joker, Folie Deux. The first film was about a man who wanted to be seen. The second is about what happens when he finally is. Legacy, then, becomes the final lens through which this sequel must be judged, not just as continuation, but as statement. Todd Phillips could have built outward. Introduced Batman, expanded mythology, fed the franchise machine. Instead, he doubled down on psychology, on intimacy, on two damaged people turning performance into partnership. That decision alone reshapes how this film will age. In the broader landscape of comic book cinema, Folie Deux feels almost rebellious. While most superhero sequels escalate scale bigger threats, louder climaxes, this film contracts emotionally. It chooses courtroom tension over citywide destruction, duets over fight choreography. It treats IP not as blueprint for spectacle, but as vessel for character study. Whether you admire that restraint or resent it depends on what you want from this genre. But step back from genre expectations for a moment. Viewed purely as cinema, this is a story about codependency disguised as romance, about two people who mistake reflection for connection. Arthur doesn't find redemption here. Harley doesn't find salvation. What they find is validation. And validation, in this universe, is gasoline. That thematic consistency strengthens the sequel's place alongside the original. If Joker explored alienation, Folie Deux explores amplification. The emotional thesis evolves logically. Isolation breeds delusion. Delusion shared becomes ideology. And ideology, once applauded, becomes performance. The musical framework isn't gimmick, it's metaphor. Song becomes shared hallucination. Harmony becomes complicity. The heightened theatricality mirrors how toxic relationships often feel intoxicating from within, catastrophic from without. When Arthur and Harley sing together, the world dissolves. Reality softens. That's the seduction. That's the danger. Does every experiment land cleanly? No. There are moments where indulgence edges close to self-awareness. Moments where you can feel the film straining to be daring. But even those missteps feel aligned with its identity. This isn't a movie trying to please everyone. It's trying to push. And that counts. Performance-wise, Joaquin Phoenix cements Arthur Fleck as one of modern cinema's most psychologically intricate antiheroes. He doesn't repeat his Oscar-winning beats. He mutates them, adds ego to fragility, composure to chaos. Lady Gaga, meanwhile, carves a Harley Quinn distinct from previous incarnations. Less cartoon chaos, more emotional volatility. Together, they create something unstable in the best way. A duet that feels unpredictable scene to scene. Visually, the film maintains its grimy aesthetic while allowing fantasy to bloom in controlled bursts. Sonically, the integration of Guth Nadutir's brooding score with musical sequences creates a disorienting but intentional soundscape. Production design and cinematography preserve grounded texture even when narrative drifts toward operatic abstraction. Financially and critically, the film's ultimate legacy may remain debated. Some will argue the original needed no continuation. Others will champion this as rare sequel courage. Time tends to be kinder to bold swings than to safe repetitions, and that's where my verdict lands. Joker, Folie Deux is not a crowd pleaser in the conventional sense. It is not designed for easy applause. It's darker, stranger, more theatrical than its predecessor. It risks alienating viewers who wanted another solitary descent into madness, but it refuses stagnation. In a franchise era built on formula, this film gambles on tone, genre, and emotional discomfort. It treats comic book mythology as psychological canvas rather than commercial checklist. That alone makes it worth engaging with, even if you ultimately reject its choices. Is it flawless? No. Is it safe? Absolutely not. And perhaps that's the most Joker-like move of all. Arthur Fleck once asked, "Is it just me, or is it getting crazier out there?" In this sequel, the answer is clear. It's not just him anymore. It's two voices, two masks, one shared illusion. And whether you hear Romance or Requiem in their final note will determine how this film lingers in your memory. So what happens after the curtain falls? After the verdict? After the duet? After the applause? Real or imagined, fades into Arkham's fluorescent hum. Because the ending of Joker, Folie Deux doesn't close the story, it reframes it. If the first film ended with Arthur alone in institutional white, blood on his shoes, and ambiguity in his smile, the sequel's final stretch feels less like an ending and more like a thesis statement. The courtroom spectacle, whether read as literal event or stylized delusion, functions as the ultimate stage. Joker is no longer an ignored man screaming into a void. He is watched, interpreted, judged, mythologized, and Harley stands beside him. Here's where the psychological architecture becomes fascinating. In the final act, their shared identity seems fully synchronized. They move in rhythm, speak in mirrored cadence. Even silence feels coordinated. That's not accidental intimacy. That's narrative fusion. Two fractured selves constructing a singular mythology. But look closer. Does Harley believe in Arthur? Or does she believe in Joker? That distinction matters, because the film quietly suggests that Arthur, the wounded, neglected man, still flickers beneath the paint. In rare moments when the music stops and performance drops, Phoenix lets vulnerability seep back through the cracks. A glance too long, a breath too shallow. It's subtle, but it's there. And Harley? Gaga plays those final scenes with layered ambiguity. Her devotion feels real, but it also feels strategic. There's an undercurrent that she understands something Arthur doesn't. Symbols last longer than people. That's the tragedy embedded in the finale. Arthur wanted to be seen. Harley ensures he will be remembered. Those aren't the same thing. The courtroom setting amplifies that idea. Courtrooms are designed for truth-seeking, yet here they become theater. Elevated benches resemble stages. Spectators resemble audience members. The legal process morphs into performance art. Whether events unfold exactly as shown or filtered through shared delusion becomes almost irrelevant. What matters is that Joker becomes spectacle. And spectacle is immortality. But immortality comes at cost. In the final musical crescendo, voices intertwining, orchestration swelling, there's beauty. Undeniable beauty. Harmony crafted from chaos. Yet beneath that beauty lies inevitability. Relationships built on shared delusion cannot sustain equilibrium. They escalate. They distort. They combust. The film doesn't scream that truth. It whispers it. When the fantasy dissolves, when lights dim and reality seeps back into frame, the silence feels heavier than any lyric. That's where Phillips and Scher make their boldest choice. They don't over-explain. They don't underline moral conclusion. They let ambiguity linger like cigarette smoke in institutional air. And that ambiguity reshapes how we interpret the entire sequel. Was this a love story? A cautionary tale? A satire of media spectacle? A musical fever dream? Maybe it's all of it. But here's the deeper layer. Folie Deux interrogates the idea of identity as collaborative fiction. We don't become ourselves alone. We are reflected, reinforced, contradicted by those who see us. Arthur alone became Joker through societal neglect. Arthur with Harley becomes something more complex, less victim, more architect of his own myth. That evolution shifts the moral center. The first film evoked uneasy sympathy. The sequel complicates it. Shared madness dilutes innocence. Responsibility becomes mutual. When two people validate each other's worst impulses, culpability intertwines. And yet, there's still humanity in it. That's what makes the film linger. You see two broken individuals grasping for connection in the only way they understand how, through performance, through spectacle, through shared narrative. It's warped. It's dangerous. It's heartbreakingly human. From a legacy perspective, this 13th chapter, this extended reflection clarifies something important. Joker, Folie Deux, doesn't exist to outdo the first film's shock. It exists to deepen its psychology, to ask what happens after infamy, after validation, after someone finally says, "I see you." The answer isn't healing, it's escalation. And maybe that's the most uncomfortable truth the film offers. Sometimes being understood by the wrong person is more destructive than being ignored by everyone. Arthur once danced alone in shadow. Now he dances in duet. But duets don't guarantee harmony forever. Sometimes they're just two people keeping each other in tune long enough for the music to drown out the silence. And when the silence returns, that's where the real story begins. What if the applause was the point all along? Strip away the courtroom theatrics. Strip away the musical crescendos. At its most unnerving level, Folie Deux becomes a film about audience complicity, not just Gotham's audience, ours. The first Joker sparked cultural debate about whether it critiqued or glamorized its protagonist. The sequel sharpens that blade. Arthur is no longer invisible, he is icon, protest symbol, media fixation. And every time the camera lingers on spectators watching him, whether in courtroom benches or behind prison glass, the film quietly mirrors us. We are watching too. That's not accidental framing. Phillips leans into reaction shots deliberately, faces lit by stage-like lighting, eyes wide, some horrified, some fascinated. The Joker thrives not just because he exists, but because he is observed. Fame becomes oxygen, infamy becomes currency, and Harley understands this instinctively. Look at how she positions herself beside Arthur in public-facing scenes, slightly angled toward him, but also toward the crowd. She isn't hiding in shadow, she's part of the spectacle. Gaga plays these beats with razor awareness. A subtle chin lift, a knowing half-smile when cameras flash. She doesn't just love the man, she recognizes the myth's market value. That shifts the dynamic from romance to strategy. Is she deluded? Yes. Is she naive? Absolutely not. This is where the film's commentary widens beyond character psychology into media critique. In a world obsessed with virality, notoriety blurs with celebrity. The courtroom becomes performance venue. News coverage becomes free promotion. Arthur once longed to be noticed. Now he cannot escape the gaze. And here's the paradox. The more visible he becomes, the less human he feels. In quieter scenes, when musical fantasy recedes, Arthur sometimes appears almost lost inside his own persona. Phoenix layers that beautifully. A flicker of confusion when applause erupts. A microsecond hesitation before leaning into Joker's grin. It's as if Arthur occasionally realizes he's trapped in the role he created. Performance becomes prison. The musical structure reinforces that theme. Songs are inherently performative. They demand attention. When Arthur and Harley break into duet, they aren't whispering secrets, they're staging them. Emotional intimacy becomes theatrical exhibition. Even love becomes content. And that's what makes the film uncomfortably modern. Shared delusion here isn't just psychiatric, it's cultural. Two people reinforcing each other's narrative inside a society eager to consume it. The film subtly suggests that madness amplified by attention metastasizes faster. Harley doesn't introduce Joker to the world introduces Joker to Harley. That feedback loop is the real engine of escalation. Visually, notice how fantasy sequences often expand spatially. Rooms feel larger, lighting warmer, background figures more synchronized. But when reality intrudes, space contracts. Fluorescent lighting flattens faces again. The spectacle dissolves. That visual oscillation isn't random. It reflects how intoxicating public performance feels compared to sterile institutional truth. And then there's the question of authorship. Who controls the narrative of Joker now? Arthur? Harley? The media? The audience? The film deliberately muddies that answer. In the climax, it's unclear whether events unfold precisely as depicted or filtered through shared fantasy. That ambiguity isn't coy storytelling. It's thematic reinforcement. When identity becomes performance, truth becomes negotiable. From a philosophical lens, Folie Deux edges into existential territory. If selfhood is constructed through interaction, then what happens when the interaction is fundamentally unstable? Arthur alone was tragic. Arthur with Harley becomes mythic. But myth strips away humanity. It fossilizes complexity into symbol. And symbols don't feel. That's the quiet horror beneath the operatic flourishes. In becoming larger than life, Arthur may lose the last fragments of the life he once had. Harley, in aligning herself with that symbol, risks the same dissolution. They don't just share delusion, they share erasure. This is why the film's refusal to deliver clean moral resolution feels intentional. There is no rehabilitative arc, no cathartic redemption. The music doesn't resolve neatly into major key triumph. It often lingers in uneasy harmony, beautiful but unresolved. Because the film isn't interested in curing madness, it's interested in examining how madness performs under spotlight. And whether that spotlight belongs to Gotham or to us remains the most uncomfortable layer of all. Arthur once asked to be noticed. Now he is. The real question is whether that attention was ever mercy or always execution. Because beneath the spectacle, beneath the romance, beneath the operatic delusion, Joker, Folie Deux, is asking a brutally old question. Is identity something we discover or something we invent? Arthur Fleck, in the first film, seemed like a man stripped bare by society. Neglect exposed him. Humiliation shaped him. Violence finalized him. It felt like descent. Inevitable. But the sequel complicates that reading. Now, Arthur is aware of Joker as construct. He leans into it, adjusts posture, refines cadence, curates presence. That's not collapse, that's authorship. And Harley accelerates that transformation. She doesn't fall for Arthur accidentally. She gravitates toward Joker intentionally. In doing so, she validates not the wounded man, but the performed persona. And that validation forces Arthur into existential confrontation. If the mask is what's loved, what happens to the face underneath? This is where the film edges into Nietzschean territory. The idea that identity is willful creation. That selfhood isn't fixed but forged. Arthur doesn't merely succumb to Joker, he crafts him. The laugh becomes weaponized. The makeup becomes uniform. The posture becomes deliberate. But creation without grounding becomes distortion. Shared delusion amplifies self-construction beyond reality. When two people co-author identity, they reinforce its extremes. Harley doesn't temper Arthur. She radicalizes him, not through force, but through affirmation. Yes, you are this. Yes, the world wronged you. Yes, the chaos is justified. And affirmation is seductive. This is the philosophical trap the film explores. If someone mirrors your darkest impulses and calls them beautiful, how do you resist? Arthur never truly had a mirror before. Society reflected rejection. Harley reflects empowerment, twisted empowerment, but empowerment nonetheless. And in that reflection, Arthur sees coherence for the first time. The tragedy? It's coherence built on fiction. Music intensifies this philosophical tension. Songs in this film aren't random flourishes. They function like existential soliloquies. When Arthur and Harley harmonize, it feels like shared truth. But harmony can exist between lies just as easily as between facts. Melody doesn't verify morality. There's a moment subtle, almost throwaway, where Arthur hesitates before fully embracing a public-facing Joker persona in the final act. It's quick, a flicker. Phoenix lets doubt cross his face before the grin locks in. That microsecond feels enormous, because it suggests awareness, suggests choice, and that's the core philosophical pivot of the sequel. In the first film, Arthur felt pushed. In this one, he sometimes feels like he's stepping forward voluntarily. That shift changes moral gravity. He isn't just victim of neglect, he becomes participant in escalation. Harley mirrors that agency. She isn't hypnotized or manipulated into madness. She chooses alignment. Her belief in Joker is not passive, it's fervent. That choice complicates simplistic readings of her as tragic follower. She's collaborator, catalyst, which raises another uncomfortable idea. Perhaps shared delusion feels less lonely than solitary sanity. The asylum setting reinforces that paradox. Arkham is meant to isolate madness, categorize it, contain it. Yet within its walls, Arthur finds connection, not healing. Connection. The institution that exists to suppress instability inadvertently becomes birthplace of partnership. Philosophically, that's bleak, because it suggests that environments designed for correction can sometimes incubate reinforcement, not by intention, but by proximity. The film's refusal to deliver clean psychological explanation deepens its existential tone. There's no monologue diagnosing their relationship, no authoritative voice labeling it toxic. Instead, we witness, we interpret, we wrestle, and wrestling is the point. Folie doesn't preach about mental illness or romantic obsession. It dramatizes the seduction of mutual myth-making. It shows how identity can become duet, how narrative can override reality when two voices harmonize loudly enough. But harmony requires maintenance, and delusion, once synchronized, demands escalation to stay thrilling. That's why the final sequences feel less like resolution and more like ignition. Arthur and Harley aren't arriving at stability, they're launching into something combustible. The music swells not toward peace, but toward intensity, which leaves us with one lingering philosophical fracture. If identity is performance, and performance is validated by audience, and love reinforces the mask, where does the authentic self survive? Does it at all? Arthur once wanted the world to hear him laugh. Now the world sings back. The question isn't whether the melody is beautiful. It's whether anyone remembers who started the song. What happens when the invention becomes more powerful than the inventor? Because by the final stretch of Folie, Joker no longer feels like Arthur's alter ego. He feels autonomous. This is the quiet horror the sequel leans into. In the first film, Joker emerged as reaction, a defense mechanism turned violent spectacle. In the sequel, he operates like infrastructure, a framework Arthur steps into, a persona that exists independently of mood or circumstance. The grin arrives faster. The posture locks in sooner. The theatricality feels rehearsed, and rehearsal implies repetition. That repetition is where myth overtakes man. Harley accelerates this process. She doesn't just accept Joker, she reinforces him. Notice how often she addresses the persona rather than the person. The tone shifts subtly when she says his name. The admiration sharpens. In those moments, Arthur seems almost smaller, as if he understands the version of him she loves isn't the fragile human underneath, but the symbol painted on top. That dynamic flips traditional tragic romance on its head. Usually, love reveals vulnerability. Here, love conceals it. Harley doesn't strip the mask away, she helps polish it, and that polishing creates permanence. Symbols don't get tired, symbols don't hesitate, symbols don't doubt. Arthur does. Phoenix threads this tension with surgical restraint. In several late film beats, there's a microlag before Joker fully arrives in his expressions. A half-second where Arthur looks like he might say something honest, something human, before defaulting back to theatrical cadence. It's fleeting, but it's devastating, because it suggests he knows. He knows the performance has momentum now, knows the audience expects it, knows Harley expects it, and once expectation sets in, deviation feels like betrayal. This is where the sequel becomes commentary on persona culture, on the way public identity can trap private self. Joker isn't just mask, he's brand, he's narrative shorthand, he's myth that feeds itself. And once myth solidifies, human complexity becomes inconvenient. Harley, in many ways, becomes myth's high priestess. She believes in Joker with near-religious fervor. But belief isn't neutral. Belief demands consistency. If Arthur falters, the myth trembles. So the relationship subtly incentivizes escalation. And escalation is addictive. The musical framework amplifies this transformation. Songs function like rituals. Each duet reinforces their shared mythology. Each performance strengthens the narrative they're building together. Music isn't escape, it's reinforcement ceremony. The danger lies in sustainability. Myth requires maintenance. Audience attention must be fed. Intensity must rise. Quiet contentment doesn't trend. Subtle stability doesn't sing. So what happens when the only way to sustain connection is to become more extreme? That's the ticking clock embedded beneath the operatic flourish. The asylum setting reinforces it visually. Institutional walls remain unchanged while personas inflate inside them. The contrast becomes almost ironic. Physical confinement, psychological expansion. Joker grows larger even as space remains limited. That imbalance cannot last indefinitely. And then there's the existential fracture. If Joker becomes autonomous, if the persona feels self-sustaining, does Arthur still exist in any meaningful way? Or has he been consumed by the narrative he authored? The film doesn't answer directly. It lets ambiguity breathe, but the implication lingers in the final images. The grin feels less reactive, more habitual, less cathartic, more mechanical. That mechanical quality is chilling because it suggests the mask no longer needs the man. Harley's presence complicates it further. She isn't just witness to the transformation, she accelerates it. Her admiration acts as stabilizer for Joker, destabilizer for Arthur. When she looks at him, she sees coherence in chaos. But that coherence belongs to the persona, and personas, once stabilized, rarely shrink. From a legacy perspective, this layer deepens the sequel's contribution to the character's mythology. Traditional Joker interpretations thrive on unpredictability. This version adds something different, inevitability. The slow calcification of performance into permanent identity. It's less about spontaneous madness, more about curated chaos. And that's profoundly modern. In an era where individuals craft online personas, reinforce them through feedback loops, and feel pressure to remain consistent within them, Joker becomes exaggerated metaphor. Arthur Fleck becomes anyone who discovered that the version of themselves that gets applause isn't necessarily the version that feels authentic, but it's the one that survives. And survival, in this world, is currency. So by the time the music fades and the institutional hum returns, the question isn't whether Joker will continue. It's whether Arthur ever could. Because once invention surpasses inventor, once myth eclipses man, once the performance becomes permanent, there may be no curtain call, only encore. What if Joker was never the mask? What if Arthur was? That inversion quietly simmers beneath Folie. We've been trained by decades of comic lore to see Joker as transformation, as break, as descent into madness. But this sequel subtly suggests the opposite, that Joker might be the first identity Arthur fully chose. In the first film, Arthur's normal self was constructed for survival, social worker appointments, forced smiles, rehearsed small talk. He was performing stability long before he painted his face. The laugh disorder, the awkwardness, the fragile politeness, those were survival mechanisms in a world that rejected him. So when Joker emerges, it doesn't feel like fabrication. It feels like release. The sequel builds on that idea by showing how comfortable Arthur appears inside the persona once Harley validates it. There's less strain in the posture, less uncertainty in the voice. When he inhabits Joker publicly, the movements flow, the rhythm settles. The theatricality stops looking like armor and starts looking like fluency. That's the unsettling shift. Because if Joker feels more authentic than Arthur, then the tragedy isn't transformation, it's recognition. Harley becomes the catalyst for that recognition. She doesn't respond warmly to Arthur's vulnerability. She responds intensely to Joker's audacity. Her attraction clarifies something Arthur may have only half understood before. The world responds to spectacle more than sincerity. And Arthur adapts. This is where the sequel becomes almost anthropological in its gaze. Identity, it suggests, isn't a core you discover. It's a role you refine based on reinforcement. Arthur tried sincerity. He was ignored. He tried comedy. He was mocked. He tried violence. He was seen. Now he tries mythology. And mythology works. The musical sequences reinforce that inversion. In fantasy, Joker isn't chaotic. He's composed. The choreography is precise. The lighting flatters him. The framing centers him. Arthur, in contrast, often appears fragmented in real, institutional scenes, lit harshly, framed off balance, isolated. The visual grammar implies something radical. Joker fits the world better than Arthur ever did. That doesn't make him good. It makes him functional. And functionality breeds permanence. Harley senses this instinctively. Her belief doesn't feel delusional in the sense of fantasy detached from reality. It feels strategic in the sense of alignment with what works. She sees Joker as inevitable force, not broken anomaly. And that reframing shifts moral weight again. If Joker is the authentic self, the unfiltered response to a brutal world, then the film isn't about madness corrupting purity. It's about clarity emerging from repression, a deeply uncomfortable proposition. But the film never fully endorses it, because every time Joker seems fully integrated, Arthur flickers back into frame, a look of doubt, a brief hesitation before a public display, a softness Harley doesn't quite notice or chooses not to. That flicker matters. It prevents the film from romanticizing the persona entirely. There's always a ghost beneath the paint, always a man beneath the myth. The tension isn't resolved, it's sustained. And sustained tension is what gives the sequel its aftertaste. Philosophically, this inversion aligns with performance theory, the idea that identity is iterative. Repeated action solidifies self-perception. Arthur doesn't wake up as Joker one day. He practices, refines, repeats, and through repetition, the role becomes reflex. Which brings us to the most chilling implication of Part 17. If Joker feels authentic because he's repeated, what happens if repetition never stops? At what point does choice become inevitability? The asylum walls remain unchanged. The world outside still buzzes with attention. Harley remains devoted. The myth grows stronger. Under those conditions, Arthur has little incentive to retreat into fragility. The persona is rewarded. The vulnerability was punished. So the mask remains, not because he's trapped inside it, because it works. That's the final inversion the sequel dares to suggest. Maybe Joker isn't the fracture. Maybe he's the adaptation. And if that's true, then the real horror isn't madness, it's evolution. Arthur Fleck once tried to fit into a world that laughed at him. Now the world laughs with him. The difference is subtle. The consequences are not. The first film positioned Gotham as decaying infrastructure, garbage strikes, underfunded services, class resentment simmering in subway tunnels. Folie Deux doesn't abandon that backdrop, but it shifts emphasis. Gotham here feels less chaotic and more captivated. The outrage has evolved into fascination. The city doesn't just produce monsters, it consumes them. That shift is everything. Arthur's original descent was fueled by neglect. The sequel suggests his ascension is fueled by attention. The world that once ignored him now studies him, debates him, broadcasts him. And that transformation mirrors something deeply modern. Obscurity is invisible suffering. Visibility is currency even when it's catastrophic. Harley functions as bridge between those states. She is both participant in the delusion and product of the culture that mythologizes it. She doesn't fall for Arthur in a vacuum. She falls for him in context, post-infamy, post-symbolism, post-viral notoriety. The Joker she meets isn't a private man unraveling. It's a public phenomenon echoing through headlines. And that distinction complicates love entirely. Because how much of her devotion belongs to Arthur, and how much belongs to the narrative surrounding him? The film doesn't answer outright. It lets the ambiguity breathe. But visually, there's a subtle pattern. When Arthur and Harley are alone, the energy feels volatile but intimate. When they are observed by courtrooms, guards, press, their chemistry sharpens into performance. Gestures grow larger, smiles stretch wider, timing feels theatrical, observation changes behavior. That's not just psychology, that's sociology. The sequel quietly critiques spectacle culture without delivering didactic monologues. It shows how myth grows through repetition. Media loops, public fascination, courtroom dramatization. Every retelling cements Joker's image further. The persona calcifies not because Arthur insists, but because the world amplifies. And Harley, intentionally or not, amplifies too. There's a haunting layer here. Shared delusion doesn't have to be false to be destructive. It simply has to be reinforced. If two people validate each other's narrative relentlessly, reality becomes irrelevant. The outside world becomes either stage or enemy. There's no neutral ground. That binary thinking mirrors extremist psychology, where identity fuses with ideology and dissent feels like attack. The film never overtly frames Arthur and Harley as political revolutionaries in traditional sense, but it flirts with that imagery. Joker's symbol lingers in public imagination. The courtroom becomes battleground of perception rather than legality. Truth becomes secondary to story. And stories spread faster than facts. That's the terrifying evolution from the first film to this one. Arthur began as isolated grievance. He becomes contagious mythology. Harley isn't just partner in romance, she's partner in distribution, in reinforcement, in sustaining the narrative. Yet for all its sociological weight, the film remains deeply intimate. Because beneath spectacle and commentary, There's still a fragile man occasionally surfacing in quiet moments. Phoenix makes sure of that. In fleeting pauses, when music halts, when Harley looks away, you glimpse exhaustion, you glimpse awareness, you glimpse the cost of sustaining myth. And it looks heavy, but heaviness doesn't break the cycle. Because once attention feeds identity, stepping away feels like disappearance. Arthur once feared invisibility more than death. Now he fears irrelevance more than confinement. Arkham walls cannot compete with public fascination. In some ways, institutionalization becomes backdrop to legend rather than limitation. That inversion is the sequel's most chilling move. Confinement doesn't diminish Joker, it magnifies him. Which leads to a final sociological fracture. When society obsesses over its outliers, it doesn't neutralize them, it immortalizes them. Joker becomes icon precisely because the world cannot look away. And that leaves us with a question far larger than Arthur Fleck. Are monsters born or broadcast? Folie Deux doesn't shout the answer. It stages it. Two people harmonizing inside a system eager to listen. A courtroom doubling as theater, a love story entangled with legend. The Mask may have started as adaptation, but amplification turned it into architecture. And architecture, once built, reshapes everything inside it. Arthur Fleck wanted to matter. Now he does. The real horror isn't that he became Joker. It's that the world helped him stay that way. Because for all its societal commentary and mythic escalation, Folie Deux ultimately lives or dies on the emotional truth between Arthur and Harley. Strip away the courtroom spectacle. Strip away the musical staging. What remains is a relationship, and it's one of the most psychologically volatile romances mainstream cinema has attempted in years. This isn't a story of opposites attracting, it's a story of fractures aligning. Arthur doesn't fall for Harley because she stabilizes him. He falls for her because she understands him without demanding correction. That distinction is crucial. Most narratives about damaged protagonists hinge on redemption through love. Here, love isn't corrective, it's permissive. Harley doesn't say, "You can be better." She says, "You are perfect like this." And that affirmation is intoxicating. From a psychological standpoint, their bond resembles what clinicians describe in real-world Folie Deux cases, reinforcement of delusional belief through mutual validation. But the film avoids clinical coldness. It portrays their connection as emotionally sincere, even tender at times. That's what makes it unsettling. They aren't faking affection. They are genuinely seen by each other. The problem is what they're seeing. In private moments, when music softens and lighting dims, their intimacy feels almost fragile. There are glances that carry vulnerability, pauses that feel loaded with unspoken longing. Gaga's Harley occasionally drops her theatrical sharpness, revealing something softer beneath the obsession. Phoenix's Arthur responds to that softness instinctively, but those moments never last long. Because stability isn't what bonds them. Intensity is. Their love thrives in heightened states, during musical crescendos, public defiance, shared spectacle. Quiet contentment seems foreign to them. The relationship requires escalation to feel alive. And escalation, by definition, can't plateau. That's the ticking emotional clock beneath the film's operatic surface. There's also an imbalance worth examining. While Harley appears empowered, active, intentional, charismatic, her identity increasingly orbits Joker's myth. She strengthens him, but in doing so, she ties her narrative to his. The more Joker solidifies, the more Harley fuses with the role of co-conspirator. Is that liberation, or dependency disguised as devotion? The film refuses easy moralizing. It doesn't frame Harley as naive victim, nor does it portray her as cold manipulator. She's somewhere in between, aware, passionate, convinced, and conviction is powerful fuel. Arthur, meanwhile, seems almost relieved by her certainty. His lifelong uncertainty dissolves when she speaks with unwavering belief in who he is. That relief reads as love, but relief can blur into reliance. When someone else defines your identity more confidently than you can, surrender feels easier than resistance. That dynamic makes their romance both seductive and tragic. The musical framework heightens this tension beautifully. Duets function like emotional contracts. When they sing in harmony, it feels transcendent. But harmony requires synchronization, and synchronization requires sacrifice of individual rhythm. The more perfectly their voices align, the less room there is for divergence. Love becomes choreography, and choreography leaves little space for improvisation. By the final act, their connection feels less like two people discovering each other and more like two performers locking into routine. The chemistry remains electric, but it carries inevitability now. You sense that deviation would fracture the illusion, and neither of them seems willing to risk that fracture. This is where the romance becomes cautionary without becoming preachy. The film doesn't condemn their love outright. It shows its beauty. It lets you feel the rush. It invites you into the duet. And then it quietly reveals the cost. Because shared delusion may feel safer than solitary doubt, but it is exponentially more dangerous. Arthur once feared being alone in his mind. Now he isn't. But being accompanied in distortion doesn't equal being saved. If anything, it deepens the fall. And that's the cruel elegance of Folie. It presents a love story that feels real, emotionally textured, passionately performed, while steadily reminding you that love without grounding can become echo chamber. Two voices. No outside pitch. Harmony sustained not by truth, but by mutual refusal to question the melody. Arthur Fleck found someone who truly understands him. The tragedy is that understanding may be the very thing that seals his fate. Because whether audiences loved or resisted Folie, this sequel doesn't exist in isolation. Joker is one of the most reinterpreted characters in modern storytelling. Cesar Romero's theatrical prankster, Jack Nicholson's mobster showman, Heath Ledger's anarchic philosopher, Jared Leto's chaotic gangster, animated incarnations, graphic novel reinventions. Every era reshapes him. So what does Phoenix's second chapter add? It adds interiority. Not just madness, but mechanism. Most Joker portrayals present him as already formed. Ledger's Joker arrives fully conceptualized. Nicholson's version is theatrical from the start. Phoenix's arc across two films charts formation, reinforcement, and now calcification. Folie becomes the missing middle chapter in a mythic transformation, the moment where persona stops being eruption and starts being identity infrastructure. That's a meaningful evolution in the character's cinematic legacy. This Joker isn't mastermind criminal genius. He isn't chaos incarnate as abstract philosophy. He's a man who learned that spectacle works. That validation feels better than invisibility. That performance protects vulnerability. In that sense, this portrayal modernizes the myth. It roots the character in psychological realism before allowing myth to crystallize. Whether you embrace that grounded approach or prefer Joker as unknowable force depends on taste. But it undeniably deepens the character's emotional blueprint. And Harley's presence alters the legacy just as much. Historically, Harley Quinn oscillates between victim, accomplice, anti-hero, chaotic romantic. Here, she becomes co-author, not manipulated into madness, but willingly stepping into it. That reframing complicates decades of dynamic between them. It shifts her from orbiting Joker to harmonizing with him. It also makes their mythology more tragic, because the version of Harley who chooses the chaos is far more unsettling than the one coerced into it. She isn't pulled under, she dives. From a franchise perspective, Folie remains self-contained. It resists connective tissue to broader DC universes. That choice strengthens its artistic integrity, but also isolates it from crossover spectacle. This Joker will likely never trade lines with Batman, and strangely, that absence feels deliberate. Because this duology isn't about hero versus villain, it's about man versus self. And now, self versus myth. That isolation may ultimately define its legacy. Years from now, when viewers revisit comic book cinema of this era, this two-film arc may stand apart, not for explosive action or shared universe world-building, but for tonal audacity, for daring to turn a villain origin into operatic psychological romance. Of course, legacy is shaped by time. Some will argue the sequel diluted the purity of the original, that Arthur's solitary descent was stronger than his shared escalation. Others will argue the second chapter completes the thesis, proving that identity doesn't stabilize after validation. It intensifies. But here's what cannot be denied. Very few blockbuster-adjacent films take swings like this. A psychological musical courtroom romance built around one of pop culture's most dangerous icons? That's not formula. That's volatility disguised as IP. And volatility ages interestingly. Heath Ledger's Joker became immortal partly because of mystery. Phoenix's Joker may endure because of intimacy. We saw him before the myth solidified. We saw him hesitate. We saw him choose. That choice matters. It transforms Joker from unpredictable force of nature into tragic architect of his own legend. And Harley? She becomes the witness who refused to look away, and in doing so, ensured the legend would never fade quietly. If the first film asked how society creates a Joker, and the second asked what happens when Joker finds harmony, then the complete arc leaves us with one lingering meditation: legends aren't born in isolation. They are echoed into permanence. Arthur Fleck once wanted someone to laugh with him. Now, history will. And whether that laughter sounds triumphant or hollow depends on how you read the final note of their duet. Because, in the end, Folie doesn't just expand the Joker myth, it reframes it, not as chaos without origin, but as performance that became permanent. Because, remove the comic book framing, strip away the Arkham walls and theatrical makeup, and what you're left with feels eerily contemporary. This isn't just a villain origin extended, it's a meditation on modern identity culture, on the way personas are curated, amplified, defended, monetized. Arthur Fleck becomes terrifying not because he's unpredictable, he becomes terrifying because he's recognizable. We live in an era where identity is increasingly performed. Online avatars, algorithmic reinforcement, echo chambers that validate belief until it hardens into truth. Folie mirrors that dynamic through romance. Two people constructing a shared narrative so airtight that external contradiction feels irrelevant. Sound familiar? The film never mentions social media. It doesn't need to. The structure of Arthur and Harley's relationship operates like a closed feedback loop. Affirmation replaces introspection, harmony replaces disagreement, escalation replaces reflection. And once a shared narrative becomes more rewarding than objective reality, retreat becomes almost impossible. That's the cultural undercurrent humming beneath the musical crescendos. Arthur in the first film was radicalized by neglect. In the second, he's stabilized by validation. That transition reflects something profoundly modern. Invisibility breeds resentment. Visibility breeds identity. But visibility without accountability breeds myth. And myth spreads faster than truth. Harley embodies the convert who becomes evangelist. She doesn't simply agree with Arthur, she amplifies him. She curates the performance. She reinforces the legend. Her belief isn't passive, it's participatory. That's the difference between sympathy and synergy. In this way, Folie isn't just about madness, it's about collaboration in distortion, and collaboration makes everything louder. There's a chilling relevance in how the film portrays public fascination. The courtroom scenes aren't just legal proceedings, they're media events. The audience inside the film leans forward the same way real-world audiences lean into sensational trials, true crime documentaries, viral scandals. Spectacle becomes communal experience. The Joker doesn't just perform, he trends. That's the quiet commentary, the sequel layers beneath its operatic flourishes. Arthur's evolution isn't just psychological, it's cultural. He learns what captures attention, he refines it, he repeats it, and once the audience responds, he leans further into the shape that earns applause. That dynamic isn't confined to villains. It's how influencer culture works. It's how ideological echo chambers work. It's how extremism recruits. Identity becomes optimized for engagement. The louder, sharper, more extreme the persona, the more visible it becomes. And visibility feels like purpose. Arthur once lacked purpose entirely. Now he has one: sustain the myth, maintain the rhythm, keep the duet alive. But here's the existential sting. When your purpose depends on performance, rest becomes threat. Doubt becomes liability. Softness becomes weakness. So the mask stays on. The film never spells this out in lecture form. It stages it emotionally. That's what makes it potent. You feel the seduction before you analyze it. You feel the rush of harmony before you question the consequences. And that's exactly how shared delusion works in reality too. By the time doubt creeps in, the narrative is already built. In the final movements of the film, there's no triumphant moral correction, no authoritative voice stepping in to dismantle the myth. Instead, there's continuation, ambiguity, the suggestion that once a narrative reaches escape velocity, it no longer needs its originator to survive. Joker becomes larger than Arthur. The myth becomes larger than the man. And that's the most modern horror of all. We no longer need authenticity to sustain identity. We need engagement. Arthur Fleck wanted to be heard. Joker learned how to be amplified. Harley made sure the volume never dropped. That triad: desire, performance, reinforcement is the engine of contemporary myth-making. and Folie captures it without ever breaking its psychological frame. This isn't just a sequel about madness. It's a mirror held up to a culture that rewards spectacle over stability, narrative over nuance, performance over personhood. And maybe that's why the film lingers. Not because it shocks, not because it sings, but because somewhere beneath the paint and spotlight, it feels uncomfortably familiar. Arthur once asked if it was getting crazier out there. The sequel quietly suggests a darker possibility. Maybe it's not getting crazier, maybe it's just getting louder. Silence, not the theatrical silence before applause. Not the dramatic pause before a punchline. The real kind. The kind that follows when the music finally stops. Throughout Folie à Deux, music functions as emotional propulsion. It elevates Arthur and Harley beyond institutional walls. It transforms confinement into stage. It turns delusion into duet. But the film's most haunting moments aren't when they're singing. They're when they aren't. There are beats, small, almost fragile, where the fantasy drops away. No orchestra, no rhythm, just fluorescent hum and breathing. In those moments, the mythology feels thin. The paint feels heavy. The persona looks almost tired. And that's where the film's final layer reveals itself. Performance is loud. Myth is loud. Love, in this story, is loud. Love, in this story, is loud. But reality? Reality is quiet. Arthur's tragedy was never simply that he became Joker. It was that he couldn't tolerate silence. Silence meant invisibility. It meant irrelevance. It meant sitting alone in a room with no audience and no affirmation. Harley helps him avoid that silence, but she also eliminates the last space where doubt could live. When two people fill every pause with harmony, there's no room left for self-reflection. The duet becomes shield against introspection. The louder they sing, the less they have to listen. And listening to yourself, to reality, is where healing begins. This film never pretends healing is on the table. Instead, it offers something more tragic, escalation as intimacy. Arthur and Harley don't fall apart because they don't love each other. They fall deeper because they do. Their bond is real. It's passionate. It's electrifying. It's also unsustainable. Because shared delusion cannot plateau. It must intensify to remain convincing. Each act must top the last. Each performance must burn brighter. And when brightness becomes identity, dimming feels like death. That's the existential trap at the core of the sequel. In the end, Folie à Deux isn't asking whether Joker is evil. It's asking whether identity built entirely on reaction, on audience, on validation, on spectacle can ever stabilize. And the answer, quietly, is no. Not because chaos is inevitable, but because performance has momentum. Arthur once performed normalcy to survive. Then he performed madness to matter. Now he performs mythology to endure. At each stage, the performance grew louder. But underneath every act was the same fragile man who just wanted connection. The cruel twist? He found it. He found someone who saw him, who understood him, who harmonized with him. And that connection didn't save him, it locked him in. That's the final sting of the film's title. Shared madness isn't just about two people believing the same lie. It's about two people reinforcing the same identity until it replaces all others. Arthur and Harley don't just share delusion, they share permanence, and permanence is heavy. So when the film ends, when the last note fades and the last smile lingers, the absence of resolution feels intentional. There's no triumphant sting, no moral exhale, just continuation. Because myths don't end neatly, they echo. Years from now, this duology will likely be debated not for its box office numbers or award tallies, but for its audacity. For daring to turn one of pop culture's most infamous villains into a study of identity construction, romantic reinforcement, and cultural amplification. It didn't play safe. It didn't chase universes. It didn't offer comfort. It offered escalation. Arthur Fleck once danced alone in a bathroom. Now he dances in harmony. The difference is profound. The outcome may not be. Because whether alone or accompanied, whether ignored or applauded, whether man or myth, the music was always inside him. The sequel simply gave it an echo. And echoes, once released, don't ask permission to linger. Arthur may have authored Joker. Harley may have amplified him. But once the world internalizes the image, ownership dissolves. This is where Folie à Deux quietly transitions from psychological drama into something almost mythological in structure. The individual becomes archetype. The man becomes symbol. And symbols, historically, outlive their origins. Think about how the film frames public reaction, the spectators in the courtroom. the distant murmurs of media coverage, the way Joker's image exists in spaces where Arthur physically does not. That separation matters. It suggests diffusion. Joker is no longer confined to Arkham or to Arthur's body. He exists in perception, and perception is powerful. In narrative theory, once a character becomes archetypal, they stop functioning as singular identity and start operating as idea. The Joker in this duology undergoes that transformation on screen. We watch it happen. From ignored individual to symbol of unrest to myth reinforced through duet. But the final act implies something even larger. The myth doesn't need Arthur anymore. That's the existential terror of Part 23. Because if Joker becomes cultural symbol rather than psychological condition, then Arthur's humanity becomes irrelevant. The world doesn't require his vulnerability. It requires his iconography. The paint, the laugh, the posture, and icons are infinitely replicable. This is where the sequel's legacy becomes fascinating within broader pop culture. The Joker has always been adaptable, reinvented for each generation. But Phillips' duology adds a tragic layer to that adaptability. It shows the cost of becoming symbol, the erosion of self required to sustain archetype. Arthur doesn't simply transform, he disappears inside the repetition. Harley's role in this diffusion is equally significant. She doesn't just support the myth, she helps ritualize it. Every shared performance becomes reinforcement. Every public moment becomes cement. Through love, she inadvertently helps erase the distinction between man and symbol. And here's the cruel irony. Their intimacy accelerates his immortality, because shared myth spreads faster than solitary one. The film's refusal to introduce Batman or external heroic counterforce makes this even more potent. There is no balancing mythology, no ideological opponent shaping Joker through conflict. Instead, the myth expands inward and outward simultaneously, internally solidifying while externally amplifying. That structural isolation keeps the focus on identity rather than morality. But it also leaves open a chilling possibility. If Joker is idea rather than individual, then Arkham is irrelevant. Confinement doesn't stop ideas. It contains bodies. This subtle philosophical expansion transforms Folie Deux into something more than sequel. It becomes meditation on how cultural villains are manufactured, not only through suffering, but through storytelling, through repetition, through fascination. Arthur once wanted to be remembered. He will be, but perhaps not as himself. The final stretch of the film suggests that permanence comes at the price of specificity. The more universal the symbol, the less room for the person. And that leaves us with one of the most haunting implications of the entire extended analysis. Arthur Fleck may have achieved immortality, but Arthur Fleck may no longer matter. The Joker matters. The duet matters. The spectacle matters. The man? Optional. That's the real requiem buried beneath the music, because in becoming unforgettable, he risks becoming interchangeable. And that tension between singular humanity and archetypal myth is what gives this duology its lingering weight. The paint dries, the applause fades, the echo continues, not because Arthur is still singing, but because the world learned the melody.